A warm welcome to all. Today, the webinar is on assessment under GST, types and procedures. And for this, we have a guest speaker, CA Yash Dhadda. He is having a work experience of over 10 years in the field of indirect taxes. He was a special invitee to the Indirect Tax Committee of ICAI for the term 2018-19 and 19-20. He is also on the panel of CII as GST, Service Tax, and Excise Advisor for the industry members. He has represented ICAI in Regional Advisory Committee, Rajasthan, under aegis of Chief Commissioner of Excise and Customs, Jaipur. He is founding core member of study group of ICAI on GST research and upgradation matters. He is also mentor of a pan-India community of indirect tax professionals named GST World. He has written handbook on principles of classification for goods and services under GST and also on casual taxable person for IDTC of ICAI. As his patient, he is also engaged in grooming young professionals of CA, CS and MBA on topics of soft skills and professional life management. And we have with us none other than CA Vivek Khuranaji, founder of CA Sansaar, and his name is just enough for the CAs. Now, I would request him to welcome him and give him a welcome address.
Thank you, Stuti ji. CA Yash Dhadda ji, speaker of this webinar, CA Stuti Mahajan ji, CA Neha Gupta ji, and all the respected member of the profession, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to all of you on this webinar on GST assessment procedure. First of all, my sincere thanks to Yash ji for giving his valuable time for accepting our invitation, because when we conducted his webinar last month, I think, then we received many requests and even many complaints that his topic was left, क्योंकि कुछ टॉपिक उन्होंने जल्दी जल्दी में कर दिया था. So we apologize for that. Now today you have the enough time, you can take as much as you can, and topic is also very important, assessment procedure. And I was just saying that it's just similar to the income tax, same thing like self-assessment, provisional assessment, scrutiny assessment, best judgment assessment. But don't think it's same to same the income tax. Means if we know the income tax assessment, we can also do the GST assessment. But it's totally different. Yes, also told me that everything is different, and different procedure, not so much complicated. So he will guide us the procedural part, and how we can save our time, because when our assessment is done, then we think, okay, now our account is sufficient and now no issue from the department side. So now over to Yash ji. So guide us regarding the assessment procedure under GST, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. You're able to see my screen, sir?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon, friends. Respected Vivek ji, Neha ji, and other esteemed members. I would again like to thank CA Sansaar family for giving me this opportunity to share my views on a different topic of GST. When we met last time, we discussed issues on input tax credit, and I think Vivek ji was generous enough to say that I have ample time, but I think it was a misunderstanding on my part last time, that I understood that I have to complete in specific point of time, but then Neha ji and Vivek ji cleared it to me. It is up to me and up to the people who are listening, that if in case we are able to engage, then we can continue. So I'll take a note of this, and today I'll try to ensure that जो हमारा topic है, उस topic को हम given जितना भी इसका length है, उसको हम जितना detail में discuss कर सके, उतना अच्छा है. Now, having said that, when we were discussing what topic we should take, so this idea came up: why should we not take assessment and audit together, and starting from section 59 up to section 65 and 66. Then I suggested that let's keep audit aside for the timing. And audit, we are not talking about the audit which is to be done by a chartered accountant or a cost accountant, but we are talking about the audit which needs to be done by the department, and which we call typically as a department audit. और उसके पीछे का पर्पस ये है that department audit is altogether different ball game. In a sense, वहां पर the details which are required the engagement the audit officer has with the SSC, and the face to face. It is at the premises of the SSC at the majority of the times, and it is instant. Whereas the concept of assessment, which is there in GST, it comes from a different background. And interestingly, to start with, GST के अंदर assessment और audit दोनों चीजें हैं और दोनों के provisions इसके अंदर हैं. Whereas हम में से बहुत सारे लोग जो GST से पहले VAT या excise practice करते थे, अगर वे दोनों की प्रैक्टिस करते थे, देन दे वुड हैव अंडरस्टूड कि एक एक्ट ऐसा था जो स्टेट वैट लॉज थे, जहां पर असेसमेंट का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है, दैट कॉन्सेप्ट वाज वेरी प्रीडोमिनेंट. In fact, in our Rajasthan state, the concept of business audit, which was incorporated in Rajasthan VAT Act, it came a little later. But before that, the concept of assessment was very pervasive, and in fact, every year after filing of the annual returns, it was understood कि वो 80 का रिटर्न का एक बार असेसमेंट तो होगा, चाहे वो नील असेसमेंट ही क्यों नहीं हो, but every return basically would go through that process of assessment. Whereas audit was for a limited number of assessees depending upon how they have been chosen, and accordingly that concept was taken over. While vis-a-vis when we compared with excise and service tax, so excise और service tax के अंदर assessment का as such कोई concept नहीं था. And specifically, we never had this concept that return for the particular year was required to be assessed. And then we were reaching to by saying, okay, ये साल का assessment अभी excise और service tax का पूरा हो गया, and then we would go to the next year. In fact, a lot of people who were not practicing in those laws, so whenever they used to receive any notice from the department, they used to loosely call it कि देखो assessment का notice आ गया है service tax और excise में, जबकि as such कोई concept नहीं था. But there, the thrust of the department was on two things. One is maybe the scrutiny of the return, जो concept service tax के अंदर तो थोड़ा late आया है, maybe in the year 2013 only. But the concept of audit or investigation otherwise, that was always there. And there they had a complete structure of dividing the assessees into various categories for the purpose of audit: category A, category B, and category C. Now today our focus is not on the audit side, our focus is on the assessment side. But I think Vivek ji rightly pointed out when we were starting and जब भी हम just इससे पहले बात कर रहे थे, he said the terms looks like as if they have been borrowed from income tax. So is the concept same and are the procedures same? And to my understanding, it is altogether different. The procedures are different. The procedures are very limited. And in fact, the assessment provisions which are here in GST, they are very point. That as a practicing member or maybe as an assessee, we should be aware of कि जो 4-5 sections हैं जिसके through departmental officer हमसे communicate कर सकते हैं on the basis of what he wants to check from us, what he wants to know from us, what tax he wants us to pay. And there he had very limited but specific powers and responsibilities. So those all of us should be aware of. I always say in the starting that whenever you see loading in my PPT to start with, don't worry, that's not a problem in my presentation or the PPT, but that's how that GST law is currently. And we are at the loading state. In a sense, we are still at the transition phase, जहाँ पे it will take some time to settle down. And interestingly, अगर हम इस concept को assessment के साथ में भी जोड़ते हैं, जो section 59 से लेके 64 के बीच में है, अगर हम उसके साथ में भी जोड़ते हैं, where our GST portal is right now trying to get stable, maybe it will get stable in next 1 to 2 years. In that concept, now when department has to actually ask for certain information, how are they going to do it? Are they going to do it online? Are they going to do it offline? How are we supposed to reply? And what are the roles and responsibilities of everybody? But before I go forward, generally, I thought today maybe I would ask a question to all of you that what are you looking for right now? And when I say आप अभी इस समय क्या देखने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, what do you want? So there may be certain answers which would come to your mind. But if I take it in a lighter sense, I would say this is the perfect time to have tea. ये चाय पीने का बिल्कुल सही समय है, और इसलिए भी सही समय है because I have been told कि दिल्ली के अंदर तो it has been good rains which are happening since yesterday. No doubt in Jaipur also we have been having good rains, and what time if somebody gives a good tea, we are happy. Now metaphorically take this tea as the GST law, and in a sense to say that everybody likes good tea. Similarly, everybody would like to have a good law. But somebody who is not looking at the end result, that is what is coming out, but somebody is looking at the process. or somebody is looking at what is the input, what is the process, so that we have this output. So we would know, if you go to Google and you try to find out कि भाई चाय कैसे बनाते हैं, how do you make a perfect tea, then you would have a recipe for it, that this is a recipe, you have to have tea leaves, you would have sugar, you need to have maybe all other things which are required. The concept is, अगर हमें ये पता हो कि यहाँ पर असेसमेंट के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ये सब चीजें कौन सा प्रोविजन किस पर्पस के लिए है, कितनी मात्रा में उसका वेटेज है, और एक पॉइंट के बाद उसका साथ छोड़ के क्यों हमको दूसरे इंग्रेडिएंट के ऊपर जाना जरूरी है, then probably we would be able to actually face the assessments correctly. Like for example, if I tell you what would GST officer ask for in an assessment, so probably if I would not read the provisions, or even if I would have read the provisions, but I would go by how has been my experience with the GST officers over the period of last maybe ever since that the older regime was there, हम नई regime के अंदर आए हैं, तो we would say एक लंबा पर्चा होगा, उस पर्चे के अंदर कुछ इन्फॉर्मेशन होगी, उस इन्फॉर्मेशन में वो मुझसे मेरा टर्नओवर मांग रहे होंगे, मेरा इनवर्ड मांग रहे होंगे, मेरा आउटवर्ड मांग रहे होंगे, and probably they would be looking for all other information from me, and I would be obliged to give it. So I should know whether I'm obliged to give the information, I'm not obliged to give the information. If I'm not obliged to give the information and officer is asking for that, should I do it? Should I do it with an intention कि कल को जाके अगर मुझे जवाब देना पड़ेगा तो मैं बोल दूंगा कि इन्होंने मुझसे मांगा था, इनको मांगने का अधिकार नहीं था, फिर भी he had asked for it. So I should know all these things, then only I would be able to actually give technically in this on the basis of this slide perfectly. So now coming to the core subject, that is the assessment which is here. If I really look at it, and before I go there, there is one very important judgment which is not in context of GST. In fact, this is not an income tax or a sales tax judgment. It is a judgment delivered by Madhya Pradesh in the context of Madhya Pradesh Municipalities Act, and it is a judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court. Very small judgment, maybe not more than a 1.5 page judgment by the name of Mathuram Agarwal. ये जजमेंट के अंदर उन्होंने बेसिकली बताया, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने, दे हैव ट्राइड टू एक्सप्लेन that whenever you're looking at any tax law and you want to ensure and you want to know that what are the clear levy provisions, और आप एक चीज कोई भी टैक्स लॉ के अंदर जो टैक्सिंग प्रोविजन है उसकी लेवी का बड़ा क्लियर होना बड़ा जरूरी है. देयर शुड नॉट बी एनी एम्बिग्विटी. एंड व्हेन वी से दैट देयर शुड नॉट बी एनी एम्बिग्विटी, what basically it means is it is standing on 3 pillars. 3 pillars हैं जिसके ऊपर वो टैक्सिंग स्टैट्यूट खड़ा है, और वो तीनों पिलर्स के अंदर भी किसी भी तरीके का कोई संशय नहीं होना चाहिए, कोई डाउट नहीं होना चाहिए. और अगर ये तीनों चीजें क्लियर हैं, then we can say that yes, levy is absolutely clear, and now it is the responsibility as to how do we have to implement it. What are those 3 things? First is the subject matter, कि हम क्या चीज के ऊपर टैक्स लगाना चाहते हैं. Second, who is the person who is liable to pay tax, कि कौन है जो ये टैक्स डिस्चार्ज करेगा. And third, what is the applicable rate of tax? क्या rate of tax उस particular subject matter के ऊपर applicable होगी. अगर हम GST की context में बात करें तो all these 3 things are pretty clear, that it's the subject matter is on the supply, the person who is liable to pay tax is the taxable person, and the rate of tax has been basically given through by way of notifications which have been issued, maybe notification number 1, notification number 2, notification number 11, or notification number 12 in that regard. तो जब ये चीजें सब क्लियर है, उसके बाद आती है बात कि अगर हम यहां से लेवी को आइडेंटिफाई कर सकते हैं और यहां पर एम्बिग्विटी नहीं है, then there has to be somebody who has a responsibility, that he is that person who is liable to determine on the basis of the levy provisions कि भाई ये ट्रांजेक्शन पर टैक्स कितना लगता है. And मोटा मोटी in common parlance that determination is known as assessment, as to how are we doing it. And that's what precisely section 2 subsection 11 also says under the GST Act, where it says that assessment means, and it's a means definition, it's not an inclusive definition, but though it has inclusive part, but it starts with means, and it says means determination of the tax liability under this act. And whenever we read this phrase, determination of tax liability under this act, that means tax liability in accordance with the provision of the act which we know. So a lot of us, in fact, I think आप में से if you would like to introspect कि पिछले चाहे आप लॉकडाउन का पीरियड ले लीजिए या उसके पहले, whenever you would have attended any webinar or a seminar, or you would have a discussion with your colleague, maybe with your senior or junior regarding any topic of GST, maybe assessments, audits, penalties, adjudication, these are all those topics which are of secondary importance. हमारा जो मेजर थ्रस्ट या हमारा जो मेजर ध्यान रहता है दैट इज ऑन मे बी सप्लाई, टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई, वैल्यू, इनपुट टैक्स credit, and that is correct also, because those are the core provisions. Those actually provisions which determine the hemisphere of the tax, how it has to be paid, on what value it has to be paid, and all those things. But the point is, practically ये सब चीजें, if I know the law, but practically if I don't know, when I have to actually deal with the law enforcing agency, so what practically they would ask for and in what manner I have to give this understanding to them would actually come from the provisions of assessment only. So once it is the responsibility under the assessment to determine the tax liability, and then they say that determination, it can be on self-assessment basis, reassessment, provisional assessment, summary assessment, and best judgment assessment. And practically these are all these 5-6 terms. You look at these 6 things in the flow chart. All these 6 are 6 separate sections which are starting from section 59 and going up to section 64. where इसमें से कुछ चीजें हैं जो एसएससी को करने की जरूरत है, कुछ चीजें हैं जो डिपार्टमेंटल ऑफिसर को करने की जरूरत है, और कुछ चीजें हैं which basically crop up if let's say assessee doesn't do anything or maybe departmental officer doesn't do anything. So depending upon at what stage we are, depending upon who is initiating the action, depending upon who is supposed to initiate the action, a necessary provision would come into picture. Okay, in fact it has layers also. Like for example, if I am doing as an assessee something, I would have to look at and doing my self assessment. I would not say that I don't want to do self assessment. I would straight away go to provisional assessment. Or officer tomorrow cannot say that I don't want to scrutinize his returns, I want to do the summary assessment direct, which is given under section 64. So there are layers, which layers have to be understood. Now mind you friends, there is one important section. I'm sure you would have heard about that section. There is the section 160. It is a very important section, and again this section is not like those core sections of ITC, supply, and all those things, but it talks about basically the validity of a notice, how are you going to challenge a notice, and when a notice can be treated as if it is not in accordance with the provisions of the act. And basically मोटा मोटी वो 160 क्या कहने की कोशिश करता है कि लेट्स से अगर आपके पास कोई कम्युनिकेशन आया है डिपार्टमेंट की तरफ से एंड यू आर लुकिंग एट इट, एंड मे बी वो जो कम्युनिकेशन या नोटिस है उसकी सर्विस को लेके आपको लगता है दैट इज द वे इट हैज बीन सर्व्ड टू यू और इट हैज नॉट बीन सर्व्ड टू यू, और इफ एट ऑल इट वाज रिक्वायर्ड टू बी सर्व्ड ऑन यू और नॉट, और उसकी सर्विस को आपको लगता है कि दैट प्रोबेबली इट हैज नॉट बीन डन इन द करेक्ट मैनर और इट हैज नॉट बीन डन ऑन द करेक्ट पर्सन, then it is your primary responsibility that you raise your grievance or you raise your objection at the initial stage only. So if let's say कोई नोटिस है जो X आदमी के ऊपर सर्व होना था पर वो Y के ऊपर सर्व हो गया, Y को पता है कि उसको सर्व नहीं होना चाहिए था, but Y told X that there is a notice which is named upon you and it has been given to me and these are what things the department is asking from you. And X doesn't challenges it. X ये चैलेंज नहीं करता है कि जो नोटिस दिया गया है वो नोटिस एक्चुअली मुझे नहीं सर्व हुआ, वाई को सर्व हुआ है, एंड इट गोज फॉरवर्ड। और मान लीजिए असेसमेंट की किसी प्रोविजन में से दैट नोटिस, लेट्स से दैट नोटिस अंडर सेक्शन 61 स्क्रूटनी ऑफ रिटर्न का, एंड विदाउट चैलेंजिंग एक्स गोज एंड सबमिट्स द नेसेसरी इंफॉर्मेशन, बट मे बी एट अ लेटर पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम ही रियलाइजेस कि नहीं, ये नोटिस को आई शुड हैव बीन एबल टू चैलेंज, I should have been able to tell the necessary officer कि ये नोटिस का सर्विस गलत तरीके से हुआ है या मुझे सर्विस नहीं हुआ है, and hence I would not and hence I am not bound to basically reply to that. Then if he doesn't do that initially, he loses his right to do it at a later point of time. So that is why before we go into all these things, maybe all these small topics we should be able to understand कि हम जब इनकी nitty-gritties में आगे जा रहे हैं और इनके basis पे we are giving replies on the merit, we are looking at these provisions, we should also be able to know that service in accordance with section 160 it is proper or it is not proper. So now straight away we go to first section, that is section 59, that is regarding self-assessment. Now self-assessment, as the name suggests, is basically assessment of the tax liability by the person who is required to pay the tax, because that's the prima facie responsibility which has been casted upon, and this prima facie responsibility is very important. In fact, आप section 59 पढ़ेंगे तो section 59 is only a 1.5 line. That's the first bullet point which you see. So section कहता है every registered person shall self-assess the tax payable under this act and furnish a return for each tax period as specified under section 39. That's it. And that's what basically every registered person is required to do. तो अगर हम इस छोटी सी लाइन को अगर डाइसेक्ट करने की कोशिश करें, it basically talks about 3 or 4 very important things. First of all, the responsibility of self-assessment is on the registered person. The word taxable person is not here, the word is registered person. That means to say that taxable person, all of us know that person is registered or liable to be registered under the provisions of this act. But this provision is not applicable on those persons who are not registered, but it is applicable only on those who are registered under the provision of the act. So that's the first filter. सेकेंड, अगर आप रजिस्टर्ड है तब आपकी प्राइमा फेसी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ये है दैट यू हैव टू सेल्फ असेस द टैक्स पेएबल अंडर दिस एक्ट. And how are you going to self-assess that? You are going to self-assess on the basis of 3 pillars, which we just talked about, coming from the judgment of Mathuram Agarwal. That is, आप levy provisions के हिसाब से and all other related connected provisions, you are looking at them. You are identifying that's the amount of tax which I am required to discharge. And once I have done that, then the last part which I am required to do is that I am required to basically file a return which is given under section 39. Now probably this is not the right time to discuss section 39 का return 3 है या 3B है, but maybe for today's understanding we would agree that GSTR 3B is the return which is under section 39. So that means self assessment का provision ये कहता है कि रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन को अपनी टैक्स लायबिलिटी को आइडेंटिफाई करना है, डिटरमाइन करना है, और उसके बाद जाके दे हैव टू फाइल अ रिटर्न अंडर सेक्शन 39, दैट इज GSTR 3B. Now mind you friends, GSTR 1, GSTR 2, GSTR 6, GSTR 7, these may be in a loose language we call them as returns, we call them as statements, but definitely they are not returns or statements under section 39. सो सेक्शन 59 का कंप्लायंस करने के लिए, मतलब मैंने मेरा सेल्फ असेसमेंट का दायित्व पूरी तरीके से निभाया है, उसके लिए जरूरी है कि मैं मेरा GSTR 3B फाइल करूं. So that's the first thing, and obviously where I'm saying that I've assessed my tax liability. Now in all this you would read a 2 words which is known as tax period. All of us know tax period is also defined under this act. Tax period clearly says that the period for which the return is required to be filed, that is typically known as tax period. तो अगर हम रिटर्न 39 की कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देखेंगे तो टैक्स पीरियड इज बेसिकली अ मंथ, कैलेंडर मंथ फॉर विच वी आर रिक्वायर्ड टू फाइल अ रिटर्न. अगर हम इसको GSTR 9 की कॉन्टेक्स्ट में टैक्स पीरियड को देखेंगे, देन टैक्स पीरियड वुड चेंज कंप्लीटली एंड 1 financial year technically would become a tax period from the context of GSTR 9. But right now we are discussing only return under section 39, so we're discussing GSTR 3B. Now in all this you would find that there is no definition of return, but there is a definition of valid return which is given, that is 217. And that definition says that valid return means a return furnished under subsection 1 of section 39 of which, and that's very important, on which self-assessed tax has been paid in full. तो हो सकता है कि मैं रिटर्न फाइल कर लूं, and I am saying that's a theoretical possibility that maybe as per the provisions of the act I am filing my return, but it would not be a valid return if in that return I am basically not self-assessing my tax liability, or if I am assessing my tax liability I am not discharging it full. Right now the design of GSTIN, the design of the returns is not like that कि मैं मेरी liability तो declare कर दूं और self assess करके return में डाल दूं, पर मैं उसको tax पूरी तरीके से ना करूं. So maybe in that sense जो GSTIN का design है वो valid return के provisions के हिसाब से है. मोटा मोटी बात ये है कि जितना मैं मेरी 3B में declare कर रहा हूं वो जब मैंने pay कर दिया, technically in that sense it will only mean that I filed a valid return. Once I filed a valid return, that means I've done my self assessment. Now, why am I striving that much on these 2 or 3 words or these 2 or 3 sentences? The whole purpose is that whenever you receive any notice, and let's say department has a point of view कि आपके assessee ने, आपके client ने एक specific provision की compliance नहीं करी है कानून की, then in that case they always look at this section and they always quote this section 59. और ये नई चीज नहीं है क्योंकि ये पुराने एक्ट्स के अंदर भी they were always talking about the concept of self assessment, because the regime under central excise, regime under service tax, regime under VAT, and in fact regime under customs also, all these regimes they are self assessment regime where government is basically putting a thrust on the taxpayer by saying okay we trust you. So हम आपको आके नहीं बताएंगे कि आपको कितना टैक्स पे करने की जरूरत है, आप अपने विवेक से, अपने विजडम से, अपने कानून की समझ से you identify your tax liability and you pay it. But it works like a double-edged sword. So tomorrow when department says that you have not paid this much amount of tax, they would all use this by saying boss, the self-assessment regime. तो सेल्फ असेसमेंट रिजीम में पहली रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी तो असेसी की थी. असेसी ने अपने दायित्व को सही तरीके से he has not been able to discharge his responsibility, and that is why now we want to move ahead and by saying that probably the tax which has not been paid by the assessee is due to a mala fide intention. उन्होंने जानबूझ के अपनी सेल्फ असेसमेंट की कंप्लायंस नहीं करी. So in that case, wherever they want to basically invoke those provisions where they say the tax which assessee has not paid is not in compliance with provisions of the act and he has not followed the self-assessment regime, there in that case they need to have some evidence by saying कि आपने return नहीं भरी तो हम यही मानते हैं कि return नहीं भरने से you did not follow the concept of self-assessment. And then assessee has to actually give an argument by saying कि return नहीं भरने के पीछे के ये reasons थे, तो हम मानते हैं हमने रिटर्न नहीं भर के सेल्फ असेसमेंट की कंप्लायंस की जो प्रोविजन है उनका फॉलो नहीं करा, बट यू कैन नॉट से दैट इट वाज इंटेंशनल एंड दीज आर द पॉसिबल रीजंस बिहाइंड इट. And that is why whenever we answer anything, whenever we look at this aspect, we always discuss and say that giving answer on merit is one part. मतलब एक चीज पे कहना कि इस पे टैक्स लगेगा नहीं लगेगा एक बात है, बट वो टैक्स अगर नहीं लग रहा है और नहीं लगने के लिए मैंने मेरी तरफ से क्या सेफ्टी प्रिकॉशंस है जो लिए हैं, जो मैं सब्सटैंशिएट कर सकता हूं कि इस अंडरस्टैंडिंग के पीछे का ये रीजन था और ये डॉक्यूमेंट ट्रेल है, ये आपको इंटीमेशन है जिससे आई एम एबल टू एक्चुअली डिस्चार्ज माय ओनर्स कि मेरी तरफ से इन अ बोनाफाइड अंडरस्टैंडिंग व्हाटएवर आई कुड डू टू सेल्फ असेस दैट माय टैक्स लायबिलिटी इज जीरो, आई हैव डन दैट. And that is why in indirect tax you would hear a lot of people saying, which is the correct advice, that whenever you are in doubt or whenever you are doing something on which you understand that probably it can have two possible interpretations and you want to take an interpretation, that interpretation is favoring to you, but tomorrow department may question it, it is always safe to just write a small letter and send it to registered post to the concerned officer, so that at least आपने अपनी तरफ से ओनर डिस्चार्ज कर दिया that I have taken this position and this is the small reason for this and I am only sending it for your records. And this in fact helps us in the further proceedings. तो जब भी हम कभी पेनल्टी पे बात करेंगे, so there is a specific subsection, section 126 के अंदर, जहां पे वो बोलते हैं कि wherever there has been a voluntary disclosure, in those cases a lenient view can be taken in respect of penalty and in fact it helps us in further period also. So though it is not written clearly in the provisions of self-assessment, but according to my understanding, it is one of the good practices which should be incorporated by every assessee wherever they want to take a position. That position may be challenged at a later point of time. Now, how do we discharge tax? That is also written under the provisions of the act. सिर्फ ऐसा नहीं है कि मैं tax liability discharge करना चाहता हूं and I want to take a view कि पहले मैं मार्च 2020 का टैक्स पे करूंगा, उसके बाद जाके मैं पुराने महीनों का टैक्स पे करूंगा. We cannot do that. Again, portal would not allow us to do it. But otherwise also I cannot do it. Whereby saying कि ठीक है मेरा February का return I want to file at zero. I want to first of all pay my March taxes, and at some point of time I will calculate my February liability again and pay it later. And ये कहां से आता है? ये आता है section 49 subsection 8 से, जहां पर the manner of payment of tax liability has also been given very clearly, जहां पे प्रायोरिटी के साथ में बता रखा है कि हमको किस ऑर्डर में we have to pay our self assessed taxes. So self assessed tax जो पुराने पीरियड का अगर हमारा कोई ड्यू है और उससे रिलेटेड जो ड्यूज है, and whenever we talk about related dues, so related dues means the applicable interest on that tax if in case we want to self assess it. So that should be paid first. सेकेंड, फिर करंट पीरियड का जो भी मेरा टैक्सेस और उसके रिलेटेड ड्यूज है दैट आई वुड पे इट. और थर्ड, उसके बाद फिर मेरे पास में इफ देयर इज एनी अदर अमाउंट व्हिच आई एम रिक्वायर्ड टू पे, मे बी अंडर सेक्शन 73 या 74, मतलब मेरे ऊपर कोई एडजुडिकेशन का प्रोसीडिंग शुरू हुआ है और उसके तहत मान लीजिए कोई डिमांड है मेरे अगेंस्ट में कंफर्म हुई है, एंड इफ आई वांट टू पे दैट, देन प्रोबब्ली व्हाटएवर अमाउंट इज लाइंग देयर इन माय इलेक्ट्रॉनिक कैश लेजर एंड क्रेडिट लेजर in a manner whatever I want to use them, then I would use them to pay this in this order. So in fact I cannot change that order also. Now with this background we come to some very interesting issues. मतलब जो चीजें हम लोगों ने करी हैं पिछले 2-2.5 साल में, and now what are the applicable provisions for them and how department would try to look at it. So one is section 73 subsection 11. This section is regarding basically adjudication and issuance of show cause notice, but इसके अंदर self assessment के बारे में एक specific you would say there is that provision for applicability of penalty. So what does this provision say? Provision ये कहता है कि अगर किसी असेसी को अपना सेल्फ असेस टैक्स पे करना था या फिर उन्होंने कोई टैक्स कलेक्ट कर लिया और उसको जमा नहीं कराया है, so in both these cases where I've collected or there is a self-assessed tax which I have with me, and I have assessed it maybe in my books of accounts or otherwise, and I have not paid it within 30 days from the due date. So अभी हमने पहले वाली स्लाइड में देखा था हमारी सेल्फ असेस टैक्स पे डिस्चार्ज थ्रू अ वैलिड रिटर्न वो है जहां पे हमने हमारा रिटर्न टैक्स पीरियड को फाइल करा अलोंग विद द पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स, और रिटर्न की जो सेल्फ असेसमेंट में बात करेगी दैट इज रिटर्न अंडर सेक्शन 39, दैट इज जीएसटीआर 3B। तो कुल मिला के मोटी बात ये है कि मान लीजिए जनवरी 2020 की मेरी टैक्स लायबिलिटी है, वो जो टैक्स लायबिलिटी मैं सेल्फ असेस कर रहा हूं, टेक्निकली आई शुड हैव पेड इट बाय 20th of February 2020, दैट्स द ड्यू डेट ऑफ फाइलिंग ऑफ जीएसटीआर 3B। लेट्स से उससे 30 दिन और, दैट इज 20th of March 2020, अगर तब तक भी मैं मेरा 3B फाइल नहीं करता हूं, in that case there can be a levy of penalty that is maximum up to the 10% of the amount of tax or minimum of 10,000 rupees, obviously whichever is the higher amount that would be applicable. So 7311 ये कहता है कि वो केस में you would be required to pay this much amount of penalty. So practically if you look at it, basically 7311 ये कह रहा है कि जहां जहां भी जीएसटीआर 3B एक महीने से ज्यादा की डिले पे फाइल हुई हुई है, उन सब केसेस में टेक्निकली एज पर सेक्शन 73 subsection 11 there can be a levy of penalty and officer can ask us to pay penalty. This was when the notices were issued by the concerned proper officers after reading this provision. So and it was brought to the notice of the council and obviously to CBIC. So they took a cognizance of this and they realized कि हाँ GSTR 3B तो बहुत सारे cases में लेट गया है, and that is not 100% attributable because of the reason that assessee did not do the compliance, but that is also majorly because of the reason that the portal was not ready or there was glitches on the portal. But without citing any reason, there is the circular number 76 which was issued on 31st of December 2018. और ये सर्कुलर से मोटी मोटी बात जो समझ में आई ये है कि अगर डिपार्टमेंट का कोई नोटिस आपके पास में नहीं आया है और उसके पहले आपने अपना 3B फाइल कर दिया है, तो चाहे आपने 3B लेट ही फाइल क्यों नहीं करा है, आपने अगर अपनी टैक्स लायबिलिटी वहां पर डिस्क्लोज करके पे कर दी है, देन यू वुड नॉट बी रिक्वायर्ड टू पे पेनल्टी अंडर सेक्शन 73 सबसेक्शन 11. The only challenge in this circular is, though it's a beneficial circular, but the only challenge in the circular is that when you read the circular, it says if you have paid your tax along with applicable interest before issuance of any notice from the department in this regard, then you would not be liable to pay any penalty. Now the question is, are assessee actually paying interest when they are actually filing delayed GSTR 3B, or are they waiting that tomorrow whenever a notice would come we would actually pay the interest? Because if we are following that strategy कि कल जब इंटरेस्ट का नोटिस आएगा तब हम इंटरेस्ट जमा करा देंगे, तो वहां पर इंटरेस्ट तो नहीं बढ़ेगा, नो डाउट, बिकॉज वी हैव ऑलरेडी पेड द टैक्स. But the problem would be that tomorrow officer may take a cognizance and he would say, then in this case now I want to proceed with 7311 because circular 76 तो वही बोलता था that you should have paid an applicable interest in that case. So maybe in those cases a view has to be taken that that return which was not filed in those cases was not attributable to us and I did not pay the interest, because still as on date today there is no clarity as to how interest needs to be paid. It has to be paid on gross, it has to be paid on net. Wrong availment पे interest pay करना है, नहीं pay करना है, वो अपने आप में एक separate chapter है, and that's why I did not pay any interest, and hence that is why I am still eligible for benefit under circular number 76 and no penalty should be charged in that regard. We go to another section which is in relation to self-assessment, and a very interesting section, section 75 subsection 12. और वो ये कहता है कि बाकी सब केसेस में जहां पर भी असेसिंग ने टैक्स कम जमा करा है वहां पर तो हमको नोटिस इशू करना जरूरी है, एंड अकॉर्डिंग टू द प्रिंसिपल नेचुरल जस्टिस एन अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफ बीइंग हर्ड इज रिक्वायर्ड टू बी गिवन. मतलब असेसी को अपनी साइड बताने का और अपना जो पक्ष है वो प्रस्तुत करने का मौका. बट द पॉइंट इज व्हाट दिस सेक्शन सेज इज ओनली इन दोज केसेस वेयर देयर इज अ सेल्फ असेस्ड टैक्स लायबिलिटी व्हिच हैज नॉट बीन पेड और व्हिच रिमेन्स अनपेड either wholly or partly, then on that and along with the applicable interest on that, there is no requirement to actually follow the procedure of 73-74, और उसके लिए direct recovery proceedings can take place under section 79. So precisely it means is कि अगर आपकी return liability के अंदर this is that liability which you have declared but you have not paid that liability, in that case department can go forward and give you a recovery and give you a notice for recovery of the tax dues along with interest, need not actually give you an opportunity of being heard. Now, ये प्रोविजन लाइट में कब आया? इनफैक्ट आपका इसका पहला एक्सपीरियंस व्हेनेवर यू वुड हैव हैड दैट एक्सपीरियंस, सो लॉकडाउन से पहले, इनफैक्ट फ्रॉम द मंथ ऑफ नवंबर 2019 अप टिल February 2020, there were flurry of notices on the interest, where there were notices being issued कि because you have filed your GSTR 3B after the due date, so you're required to pay interest under section 50 and you're required to pay that interest on the gross amount, and because it's an interest on the self-assessed tax liability which you have disclosed in the return, तो ये interest हम directly recover करना चाहते हैं under section 79. And then we got to know that there is this provision which talks about this under 75. Now, can they do it? Can they not do it? We would come to that a little later, whether it will be a self-assessed tax liability or interest or not. But yeah, in respect of self-assessment, this is one of those section 75 subsection 12 which needs to be taken care of. Now, in this regard, there is this judgment, and again, it's an important judgment. It's a judgment by Madhya Pradesh High Court, Kabir Realty Private Limited. So, what was happening? This is, and again, it's a typical situation where any assessee would have a shortage of funds, but he is working with all those service recipients or maybe customers who are registered in GST. So, Kabir Realty, what basically it was doing is it was paying tax on renting of immovable property. Now what it did is उन्होंने अपना GSTR 1 तो सही समय पर फाइल करा, जहां पे they disclosed all the details properly in respect of outward supplies, but they did not file their GSTR 3B. And then department issued the recovery proceedings directly under section 17 and 1C by saying that it becomes a self-assessed tax because you've declared that in a GSTR 1, and hence on the basis of it you want to recover it directly without giving you an opportunity of being heard, और हमको 73-74 की proceedings के अंदर जाने की जरूरत नहीं है. Assessee on the other side said that this is not my self-assessed tax, because for self-assessed tax there has to be return under section 39, and GSTR 1 is not a return under section 39, it's a statement under section 37, and hence that is why it is not a self-assessed tax, और आपको notice issue करना पड़ेगा मेरे को section 73-74 में. However, Madhya Pradesh High Court clearly said in this case that, see, whenever you're filing your GSTR 1, you're giving your details of outward supplies, you're in fact giving the invoice number, the amount of tax on the invoice and the taxable value along with the GST of the customer. There remains nothing which would be treated as a self-assessment. मतलब यही self-assessed liability है जो खुद आप अपनी GSTR 1 के अंदर declare कर रहे हैं. And once you do that and you do not file your GSTR 3B, or there is a mismatch between a GSTR 3B and GSTR 1, or the details are missing in GSTR 3B regarding whatever has been declared in GSTR 1, then it becomes a fit case for actually having a recovery proceedings under section 79. And hence that is why this judgment basically kind of gives us an understanding that why it is very important for us to ensure that on month basis our GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B should match. Otherwise, tomorrow if the gap is big, and maybe at some point of time there is a mismatch notice which has been issued, and we are unable to give a correct reply to that mismatch notice, or we are unable to give a satisfactory reply, then maybe taking a cue from this, maybe some action under section 79 may be initiated, though it can be challenged, but yes, there is this judgment we should always take care of. Coming to the concept of interest in respect of the self-assessed tax liability. So all of us are aware there is this Karnataka High Court judgment. It's a very good judgment. It is a very recent judgment. And I'm sure all of us should be able to use this. This is LC Infra Projects Private Limited. What was the limited issue in this? So limited issue इसके अंदर सिर्फ इतना सा था that the entity had filed late returns. They received a notice कि आपको ब्याज जमा कराना है, and the notice clearly said that the interest which you are required to pay under section 50, we can directly recover that interest because section 75 subsection 12 जो हमने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले देखा था, that section clearly says कि self-assessed tax and applicable interest thereon, it can be recovered without following the procedures on the 73-74. To this, in LC Infra, there were a lot of arguments which were made, and ultimately the court concluded कि जो interest की बात section 75 subsection 12 में लिखी गई है, वो interest वह वाला interest है, that is the self-assessed interest. That is to say, if let's say there is a tax liability which is there, and on that tax liability, if I have not self-assessed my interest for whatever reason, मतलब मैंने interest का amount अगर quantify नहीं किया है, and I'm not disclosing in any of my returns, then it is not a self-assessed interest, and accordingly on that there cannot be direct recovery proceedings, but there has to be notice issued in the 73-74 और उसके हिसाब से आगे बढ़ने की जरूरत है. तो टेकिंग अ क्यू फ्रॉम दैट, बेसिकली व्हाट इट मींस इज कि आपकी लाइबिलिटी जो आप डिस्क्लोज कर रहे हैं टैक्स की, और उसके ऊपर अगर इंटरेस्ट भी कैलकुलेट करके डिस्क्लोज कर रहे हैं, बट इफ यू आर नॉट पेइंग इट, then probably there is no escape. But in that regard, we should actually pay it. Otherwise, a recovery proceeding can be initiated. But if in case the liability of interest has not been quantified, then in that regard, the officer has to actually move forward and issue a notice under section 73 and 74 in that regard. So for all these provisions, basically one thing which I would like to state here before we now go to all those sections where department wants to initiate any action, अभी तक तो वो है जो सब असेसी को करनी है सेक्शन 59 के अंदर. That is, whenever any assessee would receive a notice, the department would always say by saying this is a self-assessment regime and assessee was required to basically discharge his onus. And discharging onus allegation and the necessary supporting for that allegation is the department's responsibility. But once they have put forth the allegation and they have a supporting evidence, and that supporting evidence is not filing of return, so then they have discharged their burden initially, and now ball is in our court. फिर अब हमारी जिम्मेदारी है बताने की कि जो हम रिटर्न नहीं फाइल करी हमने सेक्शन 39 के अंदर, वो नहीं फाइल करने के कारण जो हमने सेल्फ असेसमेंट की कंप्लायंस नहीं करी है, उसके पीछे का व्हाट इज द जेन्युइन रीजन. ईदर अकॉर्डिंग टू आवर अंडरस्टैंडिंग वी वर नॉट रिक्वायर्ड टू डू इट, or we wanted to do it but the system did not allow it, or third, we wanted to do it, system allowed it, but there are other circumstantial evidences according to which we could not do it. And then on the basis of the how strong our merits are, what are we able to produce, then only some conclusion would be reached. Now on this basis, now when we move forward, we come to another section, that is section 60, which talks about provisional assessment. Now, before I go to provisional assessment, if I try to draw a parallel from any of the provisions which are still there in GST, or wo kya hai? So all of us know that concept of advance ruling, it is a much talked about concept. अगर मैं भी अभी advance ruling पे बात कर रहा होता और any other speaker they would have been talking here, probably the way advance ruling orders have come, the majority understanding is कि हमको advance ruling तभी लेनी चाहिए either when we are sure that there is a tax liability but still we want to cross check with the department. But wherever we are sure that there is no tax liability, it is better not to take an advance ruling because the chances of getting a favorable order are less. Now, we know that how advance ruling orders have been passed and how they have been basically made as celebrated orders across India. So like for example, one of the orders which came from our Rajasthan only regarding directors remuneration, कि reverse charge में उस पर tax liability आती है नहीं आती है. During the period of lockdown, it became like as if it is something which has been passed by High Court or maybe Supreme Court accordingly, and it becomes the law of the land. It was a simple order which has been passed by two authorities on a specific topic, on the specific facts of the case, which is applicable on the specific person. Now, in case you still want to ask something to the department, you are not sure of, but you don't want to become famous, or in a sense you don't want to go land into that procedure of advance ruling where you know that possibility of getting a favorable response looks less, then there is an alternate way available, and that is called as provisional assessment. Though the scope of provisional assessment is very limited, because advance ruling may we have variety of issues on which we can go and seek an advance ruling, but in provisional assessment, basically a taxable person, that is again a person who is registered or liable to be registered, he basically, when he is not able to determine two things. One is कि whatever he is going to supply as goods or services, उसका value क्या होना चाहिए, या second वो जो supply करने वाले हैं उसके ऊपर rate of tax क्या applicable होना चाहिए. अगर ये दोनों में से कोई एक चीज के ऊपर या दोनों के ऊपर they have confusion and they want to seek some clarity, then and they still want to continue the business, that's the important part. So when this concept would come in that I want to start my business, I'm not sure what would be the outcome, but I don't want to wait till the time I get a clarity. So it is better that I initiate my business on the basis of some understanding, intimating it to the department that I want to start with this X. Please allow me to start with X. In the meantime, you help me to determine it should be X or Y. आप जब तक X और Y डिटरमाइन करके देंगे जो मेरे ऊपर बाइंडिंग होगा, and then I would follow it, but till that time मुझे X से काम करने दीजिए. So in advance ruling the concept is कि जब तक advance ruling order नहीं आता है तब तक basically those transactions we are not looking for past transaction, we are always looking for future transaction. In provisional assessment, basically what happens is I'm saying I want to parallelly continue my business, I want to parallelly continue my activities, but I'm putting this question to you. I'm giving you all possible evidences which you need. You provisionally tell me right now what should be my rate of tax and the value. I would go according to that, and after some point of time we will have the final assessment in that regard. Okay, so what is the procedure for this? Procedure is very simple in a sense to say that we have to make an application on the online portal, that is ASMT01, and the officer basically can ask for additional information, and once we give a reply and everything, then within filing of the application and within 90 days they would basically give a provisional assessment order where they would tell us, okay, as of now you can pay this much amount of, this is the rate of tax, and this is the value. But however, provisional assessment happens in a way where they basically want some guarantee or some surety from the assessee, so that tomorrow agar final assessment ke time pe jaake tax liability increases or there is an additional requirement, then tomorrow assessee may not run away by saying no, I don't want to follow it. So they ask for a security, and they also ask for a bond, and in that case basically that security is maximum up to 25% of the bond which is being executed. So there is a specific format of bank guarantee which is required to be given. There is a bond which needs to be executed with the government authority, and once we do all these things, then we are basically allowed to have on the provisional basis the rate of tax and the value which has been given in the provisional assessment order. So that's the first part of this. जब ये पहली चीज हो जाती है, then comes the second part where actually after the period of this 90 days, जब भी वो provisional assessment को order आ जाता है, then proper officer basically would go and do the final assessment. And final assessment के लिए time limit which is given to them is basically 6 months from the date of the communication of the provisional assessment order. So initially there was 3 months from the date of filing of application. उसके बाद वहां से अगले 6 महीने for giving the final assessment order. In case there is a problem or the proper officer is unable to actually finally assess it for whatever reason, for the lack of information or for the complexity of the matter, or he wants to basically seek opinion from an expert or anything of that sort, or he wants to understand the processes a little more in detail, then in that case they have to seek permission from the senior officer. So maybe a joint commissioner or additional commissioner, they have to give a reason. They have to basically give ask that what is the reason on the basis of which they are seeking permission for the extension. And once they get an extension, so JC and ADC, they can give an extension for 6 months. And uske beyond भी मान लीजिए they're unable to finalize the assessment, then they have to go to the commissioner. Commissioner has to again record they have to seek reasons. Commissioner would record the reasons in writing, and then they would give an additional time of 4 years whether the provisional assessment can be finalized. So these are the time limits through which the assessment can be finalized. Now, if anybody wants to look at what is the advantage of this, so advantage is your business activity is not disrupted. आप business कर सकते हैं, you are allowed to basically do business on the basis of the provisional rates. Disadvantage, or in a sense, what is that contingent factor in this? क्या चीज है which is contingent in nature in all this? So the contingent factor is that tomorrow, let's say during the course of final assessment, the liability is at a higher rate. So let's say I was paying at 12% and final assessment order said it should be under 18%. Then assessee is required to pay tax at the rate of 6% for the previous transactions जो उन्होंने execute करे. Plus he would be also required to pay interest, and accordingly that provision would be applicable of interest upon them. If in case, let's say it was at 12% and finally it is decided it should be 5% but not 12%, then they may seek refund from the government subject to provisions of unjust enrichment कि उन्होंने इसका burden pass on नहीं किया है, and they may claim a refund of that, and if possible, then looking at the timelines, they would be able to claim a interest also applicable on that reduced rate. So that these are the provisions for provisional assessment. Now you would see in this case also, here the first thing actually initiates from the assessee side. So section 59 self-assessment, it was completely relying on the assessee, where assessee was doing something and it was culminating into filing of return, that is GSTR 3B. Provisional assessment, it starts with actually giving an application to the proper officer, and once the application to the proper officer is given, after that the officer takes all the measures and finally gives an order. Note, it is needless to say that this final assessment order is an appealable order. If assessee is not satisfied with the value or with the rate, they may go to the first appellate authority, they may go to the second appellate authority, they may go to High Court, they may go to Supreme Court in this regard. Whereas the disadvantage in the advance ruling is that in case of an advance ruling order, you can go to the appellate advance ruling authority, and after going to appellate advanced ruling authority, you may only directly go to high court. जहां पर भी challenge ये that high court may take a decision by saying that they would not interfere in the order on merits which is given by the appellate authority. So these are two pros and cons of what can you do in advanced ruling, what you can do in provisional assessment. But yeah, it's a good medium for all those people who are basically in that line of business, for them where continuity of business is important and they want to reach to certainty at the initial level, because they would be dealing with all those people. From them they would not be able to actually collect tax at a later point of time. Now we come to one of the most important provisions in the assessment which is there, that is under section 61, and that section 61 is regarding the scrutiny assessment. Now friends, I'm sure all of you must have handled, or you are aware about the basics of how assessment was happening in VAT, और वैट के अंदर जिस तरीके से असेसमेंट होते थे, इनफैक्ट अगर मैं वैट से भी ड्रॉ ना करके आई गो टू इनकम टैक्स. So in income tax, now we have this concept of limited scrutiny or detailed scrutiny or anything of that sort. But हम जानते हैं income tax में जब scrutiny assessment होता है तो वहां पर एक there is a लंबा चौड़ा questionnaire which they have, and they would have 20 to 30 points. They would ask for GP ratio, NP ratio, justification for the expense which is there, details of the income which you have earned, foreign receipts, and all those things. And then we are required to basically submit the information. Then whatever information we are submitting there, on the basis of it, that the scrutiny of the return takes place, and finally an assessment order is passed. Similarly, under VAT regime also, that assessment was a very comprehensive assessment where officer had a lot of areas where he could ask for a lot of information, where during the course of assessment he would ask for all other things which are beyond the returns also. बट जब हम सेक्शन 61 की बात करते हैं, और अगर हम इसको वैसे देखें प्रैक्टिकल एस्पेक्ट में, तो पिछले 2 साल में हम में से कभी ना कभी किसी ना किसी के पास में ASMT 10 तो आया ही है. सो देयर इज दिस नोटिस व्हिच कम्स एट ASMT 10, और ASMT 10 नोटिस बोलता है, जो मेजॉरिटी केसेस में जो नोटिस इशू है वो ये है, आपकी GSTR 3B में ITC का फिगर इतना है, आपकी GSTR 2A के अंदर जो क्रेडिट है उसका फिगर इतना है, and there is a substantial difference, and now you're required to give the explanation. And then that comes under section 61, read with rule 99, to which we call it ASMT 10 notice. Basically it's a notice under this scrutiny assessment regime. Now friends, in GST, scrutiny assessment is very limited, and that is what I think all of us as practitioners we should be aware of, and we should know whenever we are basically giving an answer to the proper officer whenever we receive a notice under ASMT 10. Here ASMT 10 is not a notice, or they are not a proceedings where officer will first seek information from us. ये बिल्कुल उल्टा है. यहाँ पर ऐसा है कि ऑफिसर के पास में जो इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल है उसके बेसिस के ऊपर he basically wants to verify the correctness of the return, and he wants to inform the discrepancy. So that's the first thing he can do. That means section 61 में एंटर करते टाइम ऑफिसर के सामने एक्चुअली डिस्क्रिपेंसी होनी चाहिए, और वो डिस्क्रिपेंसी से he has a doubt on the correctness on the return, or because he has a doubt he want to verify that correctness, and to verify that basically he is informing the discrepancy which is coming in ASMT 10. And now you compare it with income tax or VAT or anything of that sort. So income tax के अंदर whenever a case is selected for a scrutiny, they never say that आपकी इनकम टैक्स रिटर्न के अंदर हमें इस खर्चे पे डाउट है इसीलिए हम आपका स्क्रूटनी कर रहे हैं. दे हैव डिफरेंट पैरामीटर्स फॉर दैट. यहां पर पैरामीटर डिफरेंट है. यहां पर पैरामीटर ये है कि यहां पर डिस्क्रिपेंसी प्री आइडेंटिफाई होगी, और उसके बेसिस पर रिटर्न की जो करेक्टनेस है उसके ऊपर क्वेश्चन मार्क है, और उसको वेरीफाई करने के लिए प्रोसीडिंग्स आर इनिशिएटेड हियर. सो दैट मींस द ऑफिसर हैज टू डू होमवर्क एट हिज साइड. He cannot basically ask us to do some homework, submit that homework to him, and then on the basis of it he would proceed and then ask for further information. So first of all, on whom it is applicable, it is only applicable on registered person. That is pretty obvious because it is scrutiny assessment, it is scrutiny of a return, and return can only be filed by a registered person, it cannot be filed by an unregistered person. Now what is proper officer doing? He is scrutinizing the return, and this word return is very important. We will come to that. What is return? So कौन से रिटर्न है, कौन सी चीज रिटर्न नहीं है, किन पे वो इशू कर सकते हैं, किन पे इशू नहीं कर सकते हैं, and what do they want to do? So as I just mentioned, to verify the correctness of the return and inform the discrepancy. Okay, how do we reply to this? We have to reply that in ASMT 11 there is a prescribed format which has been given in the rules to that. Interestingly, then there is this a part which is given in the rules which is important. That is, He has issued ASMT 10. I have replied to him in ASMT 11. If he is satisfied with my reply, he has to issue ASMT 12. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen ASMT 12. In fact, we don't know as of now how many. Basically, though departmental officers are now all well educated, they are basically upgrading themselves. But I don't know how many of them are aware that they are basically required to issue ASMT 12, and in every case they are not required to basically issue a notice or anything of that sort. तो जहां पर वो हमारे जवाब से satisfy है, to close the matter, they have to issue the ASMT 12. So as a professional also, we should be aware that whenever there is an ASMT 10 which has been issued, the proceedings have been closed in our favor and there is nothing which is going beyond that. The only proof of that is कि हमारे को पता हो कि ASMT 12 इशू हुआ है और उसका इंटीमेशन हमारे पास में होना चाहिए. Now, what happens if in case the officer is not satisfied from our reply? In a sense, he says that whatever reply we have given in ASMT 11, he doesn't agree to that. Then in that case, what he would do is he would again ask us to submit further information on the basis of the reply which we have given. Then after submitting the information, again there can be two possibilities. Either we would accept that there has been a mistake on our part and we agree to pay tax, and we agree that we will take a corrective action in the next return. So this is clearly written in the rule and the section that how are we basically required to take the corrective action. तो मान लीजिए ASMT 10 इशू हुआ, उन्होंने बोला आपकी GSTR 3B और 2A के अंदर डिफरेंस है. Kindly give an explanation to that. We give an explanation by saying that yes, we agree that there are some credits which do not pertain to us और वो हमने हमारे 3B में ले लिए. So I agree, I want to reverse it. Then the mechanism which is given in the rule is to basically do the reversal is that I am basically required to take a corrective action in my subsequent return. तो मैं जो अगले महीने का मेरा GSTR 3B फाइल करूंगा उसके अंदर I have to rectify the error by reversing the credit or paying the tax, whatever is the case applicable. If in case I don't take the corrective action, or if in case he says that he doesn't agree with me, I say I also don't agree with whatever you are saying, then in that case officer cannot say कि ठीक है अब मैं आपसे रिकवरी करना चाहता हूँ. He has very specific guided steps which he needs to follow. In a sense, अगर मान लीजिए ASMT 10 इशू हुआ है, उन्होंने बोला डिस्क्रिपेंसी है, मैंने बोला I don't agree with the discrepancy and that's my basic reason for that. He doesn't agree with my reason, then I am not obliged to do anything. And he is not empowered to say कि now I want to basically recover the tax from you जितना discrepancy का है क्योंकि बहुत बातचीत हुई हमारे बीच में. No, it doesn't work like this. Then he has either of these four things which he can do. Either he can refer to the audit commissionerate, तो वो अपने audit commissionerate को लिख सकते हैं कि ये एक assessee है जिनका return हमने scrutinize किया था and we realize कि there is an error in this and or there is a discrepancy in that and that's why we request you to basically do the audit under section 65 audit of the records. Then in that case audit will basically on his own judgment on the basis of their priority they would decide कि वो किस point पे मेरा audit करना चाहते हैं. So audit will not done by the same proper officers जिन्होंने ASMT 10 issue करा है. Audit वो करेंगे जो लोग these are basically given empowered to do the audit under the GST provision. There is an audit commissionerate in every state for that. Then second, अगर audit नहीं special audit कराना है, मान लीजिए accounts इतने complicated हैं that the officer realizes that maybe audit would also not be able to bring out the correct things, then they may refer this case for the special audit जहाँ पे वो chartered accountant या any other professional they would take necessary services of those people. Or if in case he realizes that it is a fit case where a search proceedings should be conducted in the premises, then they may seek permission for conducting the search, or they may write to the anti-evasion wing of the department by saying that this is a particular case which needs to be taken up, and when only the permission would come or the team realizes that now it is a fit time to go and search the premises, then they would take it up. Or lastly, they may actually propose to issue a show cause notice under section 73 or 74 as the case may be, और उसके बाद वो assessee का adjudication procedure शुरू होता है. अब show cause notice का भी ऐसा है that same officer may issue a show cause notice, he may not issue a show cause notice. That depends upon that how proper officer has been defined और क्या powers है जो necessary relevant SGST Act या CGST Act में दे रखी है. Like for example in CGST Act, on the basis of the monetary limits, the powers have been given कि ये monetary limit तक AC issue कर सकते हैं, इसके ऊपर JC कर सकते हैं, इसके ऊपर additional कर सकते हैं. Whereas SGST के अंदर, like in our state, it is not on the basis of monetary limit, but it is on the basis of area. So then depending upon the officer जिन्होंने नोटिस इशू करा है वो कौन से डिपार्टमेंट है, उनके पास पावर है नहीं है, and doesn't want to go through 65, 66, 67, then he can go to 73 and 74. So from this, friends, I'm sure you are able to basically identify कि ASMT 10 इशू हुआ है, इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि अब तो डिमांड कंफर्म्ड है. ASFT 10 इशू हुआ है तो बड़ा लिमिटेड है, जहां पर ऑफिसर के साथ पास पहले से इंफॉर्मेशन होनी चाहिए, उसके बेसिस पे डिस्क्रिपेंसी आइडेंटिफाइड होनी चाहिए, उसके बेसिस के ऊपर देन ही इज आस्किंग फॉर अ रीजन फॉर दैट, and on the basis of it if he is not satisfied, then either of the four things he has to finalize an approach and refer accordingly, and then his role is over there. So proceedings under 67 would end there by referring the case to the concerned person who is required to take an action. That's a typical example of how ASMT 10 looks like. I'm sure all of us have seen this, where basically they would write a tax period. So now some checkpoints which are important for us to check, obviously in all ASMT 10 is it should always be for a tax period. It cannot be generic in nature. Okay, like for example in this case you see a tax period 17-18. Now we know in context of अगर return मेरी GSTR 3B है तो मेरी GSTR 3B में टैक्स पीरियड कभी भी 17-18 नहीं हो सकता. The tax period has to be the specific month for which the 3B has been filed. So he has to write what are those specific months for which they are looking for the information. Like in this case, they have written July 17 to September 17. So it kind of makes a reasonable sense to say that for these three tax periods, this ASMT 10 has been issued. Then you see that what do they write? So they say there is this 3B which is there in your credit, which is there in your 3B. There is ITC which is available in your 2A, and there is a difference which is coming, and then they're saying you are hereby directed to explain the reason for the aforesaid discrepancy within 30 days from the date of notice. Now friends, one thing which is also very important and we should be aware of, जब आप सेक्शन 61 पढ़ेंगे तो सेक्शन 61 के अंदर ये लिखा हुआ है कि एसएससी को जो रिप्लाई देना है इट हैज टू बी विद इन 30 डेज. ओके, जबकि जब आप रूल 99 जो रूल पढ़ने जाते हैं 99 इसके रिस्पेक्ट में रूल कहता है कि 30 डेज के अंदर जो डे ऑफिसर ने दिया है तब तक रिप्लाई, या फिर अगर फर्दर एक्सटेंशन ऑफिसर देता है. सो इन दिस रिगार्ड if you read the rule and you try to actually borrow its power from there where they are coming, तो सेक्शन 61 बेसिकली एसएससी को एड हॉक 30 दिन का टाइम देता है. Officer, by invoking Rule 99, cannot reduce the time limit from 30 days to maybe 15 days or 10 days. So we should be aware about this. If you are not able to compile the information within 30 days, we have the power which is coming from the rule that says for 30 days, and we are entitled to give a reply. And officer is basically duty bound to give us time of 30 days to give a reply to ASMT 10. Okay. Now here it also becomes important that we should know who has issued ASMT 10. I'm sure you are aware about this. I am aware. आपका इसके ऊपर एक session भी हुआ है how to reply to the notices, but I would not go into detail of it. But I would always say that we should always ensure that who is a proper officer, because GST being a new law, सिर्फ टेबल के ये साइड पे confusion नहीं है, टेबल के वो साइड के ऊपर भी confusion है. That is the concerned person proper officer or not, whether he has been given the function which under the law. हर ऑफिसर का there is a specific function which has been defined. There is a circular for that. There is a notification for that. They have powers through specific monetary limits. They have powers for specific territorial area. They have powers in specific persons also. So like if I am an assessee of CGST, SGST officer cannot issue me ASMT 10 for discrepancy of SGST. If there is only discrepancy of SGST, but I am coming, my administration is lying with the CGST, then the proper officer is CGST officer only. And in that case, when the proper officer is a CGST officer, for even SGST also, he has to issue ASMT 10. SGST officer cannot do that. So like this is one of those examples we should be aware of, and we should know that the proper officer has correctly issued the notice or not. Then we come to क्या रिटर्न है जिसका बेसिकली सेक्शन 61 के अंदर नोटिस इशू हो सकता है, and that is very important also. Why? Because if you should see on the screen, you would see there is GSTR 1, there is GSTR 3B, there is GSTR 9 and GSTR 9C. Let's say tomorrow we receive a notice ASMT 10 जो ये बोलता है there is a discrepancy between your e-way data and GSTR 1, and hence we have issued a notice to you under section 61. According to my understanding, officer cannot issue a notice for discrepancy between data in GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B for a very simple reason that it is not a discrepancy under the return. Because data of e-way bill, it is not a return. Data of GSTR1, it is a statement, it is not a return. And hence that is why अगर notice issue हो सकता है तो 3B versus 1 का notice issue हो सकता है, पर notice 1 versus e-way bill का issue नहीं हो सकता, या if it notice 9C versus 1 का issue नहीं हो सकता, या notice 9C versus e-way bill का issue नहीं हो सकता, या notice 9C versus balance sheet का issue नहीं हो सकता. Because GSTR 9C is also not a return, it's a reconciliation statement. GSTR 3B is a return, GSTR 9 is a return. Similarly, if you talk about section financial year 17-18, can there be ASMT 10 for a tax period on monthly basis? अगर हमने हमारा एनुअल रिटर्न फाइल कर दिया है, वी आर वेल विद इन आवर पावर्स, वी आर वेल विद इन आवर राइट टू ऑब्वियसली रिप्लाई टू द नोटिस बाय सेइंग that because whatever you are asking from GSTR 3B, we have incorporated that in GSTR 9, and hence there lies no jurisdiction for you to basically ask information for GSTR 3B. Necessary action has been taken in GSTR 9. And by replying this, at least we have discharged onus from our side. If you want to give a further information, that is absolutely okay on your part. अगर आप extra information देना चाहते हैं, जरूर दीजिए. But if in case you want to stick to this and by saying because I have incorporated in GSTR 9, then it becomes the ball again lies in their court and they have to really look for it कि 9 में से क्या information है जिसको they have to pick and identify that it has a discrepancy, and then they have to issue under ASMT 10. I have already said that tax period, it has a very clear meaning given under 2106, which says that tax period means the period for his return is required to be furnished. So what is the procedure basically? So when I really look at all these things again together, what is the procedure which is given under section 61? Read with section 99. So that is, Pehla, officer has to scrutinize the return and related particulars. So because this word related particulars is there, we cannot take a view कि GSTR 1 के लिए notice नहीं आ सकता, GSTR 1 के लिए ASMT 10 आ सकता है, but वो 1 को हमेशा corroborate होना पड़ेगा 3B के साथ में. It cannot be on standalone for 1 and standalone for e-way bill. Second, and you read rule, even it is more interesting. It says where any return furnished by registered person is selected for scrutiny. So there has to be a selection of return first of all. So that means whenever there is a selection, the proper officials will scrutinize it. That means ASMT 10 का जो notice है, वो computer generated notice cannot be there. There has to be a proper officer has to sign it, and proper officer has to explain what is that discrepancy which is looking for. So there has to be some process of selection which is taking place. Maybe computer is helping in that, maybe artificial intelligence is helping in it, but there has to be manual intervention of the officer when the notice is being issued. ये आने वाले टाइम में इसलिए इंपॉर्टेंट होगा क्योंकि हम इनकम टैक्स में देखते हैं कि आजकल जो 143 के नोटिस इनकम टैक्स में आते हैं, अगर मैं वहां सेक्शन पे जाऊं तो वहां पर इंटीमेशन के अंदर जो डिफरेंस निकालता है, दैट इज कंप्यूटर व्हिच इज जनरेटिंग द डिफरेंस एंड इट इज गिविंग अस द इंटीमेशन इन दिस रिगार्ड. That provision is not here in GST. There has to be a person who has to basically do all these things. Okay. And you read something in blue that is even more interesting. It says he shall scrutinize the same in accordance with provision of section 61 with reference to the information which is available with him. That means he cannot issue a notice under section 61 और वो मुझसे 50 पॉइंट का कोई स्क्रूटनी के लिए इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं मांग सकते. He cannot tell me that he wants to do a scrutiny of my GSTR 3B or GSTR 9, and that is why he is seeking for all these information. He should have information, he should have discrepancy, he should be able to identify it, and he should only ask for the reason from me, what is the reason for discrepancy. Once I give an answer to him and he is not satisfied, then उसके रिलेशन में whatever document he want to ask for to substantiate की जो मैंने reply लिखा है, that he may ask for. That power he has from the section, that power he has from the rule. So the process would be, he would select a return, he would select a tax period, he would scrutinize it, and then in case he wants to go further, he may issue a notice by saying now he want detail of 1, he want detail of e-way bill, or whatever is the case. So friends, whenever you're receiving notices ASMT 10 for the first time, you should be able to actually identify all these details. Why am I giving you examples like this? So like, I'll give you one funny example, one funny case which we received. So our client was running a mess, and that client was under the Factories Act. So one of the notices in ASMT 10 which we received is that you are running a factory under the Factories Act, and you have employees which are more than 500, and you are running a mess also. So as per schedule 1 entry 2, that the transaction between related parties, even without consideration, that is liable to GST. तो आपके यहाँ पर जितने भी एम्प्लॉइज हैं वो सेक्शन 15 के एक्सप्लेनेशन के हिसाब से दे बिकम योर रिलेटेड पार्टी. Because they become your related party, you should have actually paid GST on it. पर हम जब आपका GSTR1 देखते हैं, and that's the funny part. So they said जब हम आपका GSTR1 देखते हैं तो हमको सिर्फ B2C के अंदर कोई भी सप्लाई नहीं दिखती है. Now all your employees should not be registered in GST. So when your B2C supplies are zero, we understand that you have not discharged your GST liability on the food which you have given to your employees, and that is why we are issuing a notice under ASMT 10. So this notice is so much assumptive in nature. इसके अंदर assumption के अंदर assumption है कि पहले तो फैक्ट्रीज एक्ट है तो आपके यहाँ पे कैंटीन है तो आपके एम्प्लॉयज को आप खाना खिला रहे हो तो उसके ऊपर जीएसटी लगता है तो आप जमा नहीं करा रहे हो वो हम ऐसे मान रहे हैं क्योंकि आपकी GSTR1 में डिटेल नहीं है, और इसीलिए हम आपको ASMT 10 इशू कर रहे हैं जो क्लियरली कहता है कि यहाँ पर डिस्क्रिपेंसी होनी चाहिए, और डिस्क्रिपेंसी समथिंग व्हिच यू आर एबल टू सी. So all these notices, these are not as per the provision section 61. We are not obliged to in fact reply on merit to them, but we can just give a small reply by saying that it is not covered by the aspect of section 61, and hence you are not obliged to give necessary explanation to the information which has been asked in this regard. What is correctness and discrepancy? दो वर्ड जिनका बहुत इस्तेमाल हुआ है इस केस के अंदर. So as we all know, as we just in fact discussed, that और नोटिस कैन नॉट बी अजम्पटिव इन नेचर कि आप मैन्युफैक्चरर है और आप चूंकि मैन्युफैक्चरर हो तो आपको रिवर्स चार्ज में ट्रांसपोर्टेशन के ऊपर लाइबिलिटी पे करनी चाहिए, पर आपकी GSTR 3B में हमको रिवर्स चार्ज में एक भी रुपए का टैक्स पे करा हुआ नहीं मिल रहा, इसलिए हम आपको ASMT 10 इशू करें. A notice cannot be issued in this manner. There has to be a certain difference. You should come very clearly, and when we say correctness, it has to be legally and factually true. So something which is on record factually, that is basically only covered here. क्या notices है जो valid हैं जो issue हो सकते हैं? So there is a difference in 1 and 3B. There is difference in 2A. It is not 2B. Difference in 2A and 3B. There is a difference in e-way bill and GSTR 3B, or there is a difference in various columns of GSTR 9. These are all possible reasons for which ASMT 10 can be issued. But yes, they cannot ask for exhaustive information in this regard. In fact, finally, in this case, you are only required to say you agree to the discrepancy or you don't agree to the discrepancy. हमको लंबा चौड़ा जरूरत इस सेक्शन के अंदर रिप्लाई देने की जरूरत भी नहीं है कि ये केस लॉ में ऐसा लिखा है and that's what the circular says and that's what the notification says. You have to either say you agree with the discrepancy and you will pay it, or you don't agree with the discrepancy for whatever reason best known to you, and then officer has to decide whatever action he wants to take. So that's the final conclusion of how proceedings under section 61 are concluded, that ASMT 10 is issued. Either officer has to accept what we are saying, तब तो ASMT 12 में हम हमको इंटीमेशन देंगे और कोई एक्शन नहीं होगा, या फिर assessee has to accept whatever discrepancy has been intimated to him and he has to pay interest and tax in the subsequent return. या फिर assessee is not accepting the discrepancy, then officer can go forward and do proceedings under 65, 66, 67, 73, 74 as the case may be. So you realize friends, यहाँ पर जो scrutiny की proceedings है और जो scrutiny की proceedings income tax में है, they are altogether too different. They are not same at all. Here the scope is very limited and officer cannot go beyond whatever within the circumference of section 61. Now with this we come to 62, and 62 is basically applicable on all those people who are registered but not filing returns. So 61 was applicable for all those people who were registered and filing returns, और वहां पर return में discrepancy identify हुई थी. 62 is applicable for all those people who are registered but not filing returns. And 62 का जो birth है, it gets birth from section 46. So 61 के अंदर notice भी section 61 में issue हो रहा था, but section 62 के लिए जो notice है वो notice पहले section 46 में issue होता है. So what is 46 saying? So 46 ये कहता है कि एक रजिस्टर्ड आदमी जिसको अपना रिटर्न फाइल करना है, चाहे तो 39 में या 44 में या 45 में, मतलब या तो अपना GSTR 3B फाइल करना है, वो उसमें फाइल नहीं करा, या GSTR 9 फाइल करना है, उसने 9 फाइल नहीं करा, या उसको अपना फाइनल रिटर्न फाइल करना है 10, जो उसने वो भी फाइनल रिटर्न फाइल नहीं करा है, या तो तीनों नहीं करे या तीनों में से अगर उसने कोई नहीं करा, then a notice can be issued to him asking him to basically furnish the return within 15 days from the service of the notice. जिस notice को हम typically कहते हैं GSTR 3A. तो अभी आपको you must have realized and experienced that पिछले एक महीने में जब लॉकडाउन में all dates which were being extended, तो कुछ एसएससी का डेट सितंबर है, कुछ का वही मंथ का अगले महीने का 20 तारीख है, एंड एवरीथिंग ऑफ दैट सॉर्ट. So all those assessees who are required to file monthly returns, but they did not file their returns on the due date. मान लीजिए उन्होंने 3-4 दिन का gap था. So department officers were vigilant enough to actually issue the notices in 3A by saying you have not filed the returns. Please file the return within 15 days. That is, they have their own reasons to do so, but yeah, that notice for not filing can be issued within 15 days. Now, what happens if somebody who has issued a notice for filing of return, he doesn't file the return in that case, then proceeding would come to section 62. तो 46 के बाद then officer has power under 62. 62 क्या बोलता है कि आपको नोटिस दिया 39 या 45 का रिटर्न, तो 44 का रिटर्न अगर किसी को बोला कि बॉस प्लीज फाइल योर एनुअल रिटर्न, दैट पर्सन इज नॉट फाइलिंग इट, देन इन दैट केस द नोटिस विल नॉट बी इशूड अंडर 62. बट आपको बोला pay tax and file return under 39 or file and final return, but the person is not doing that, then in that case officer has power. Okay, and what is that power? The power is to basically do a best judgment assessment. Now all of us understand what best judgment assessment is. Basically it is best to the judgment of the officer depending on the circumstances and evidences he have, to the wisdom which he has collected over the years by understanding the law, and whatever estimates which are reasonable which he wants to put. तो बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट के अंदर देयर इज सम अमाउंट ऑफ एस्टिमेट व्हिच वुड ऑलवेज बी देयर, बट दैट एस्टिमेट हैज टू बी रीजनेबल. नाउ इंटरेस्टिंगली यहाँ पे क्या लिखा है, एंड दैट वी शुड बी अवेयर ऑफ, इट सेज दैट दिस बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट कैन बी डन बाय द ऑफिसर ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल और गैदर्ड. और आप ये जो गैदर्ड वर्ड है ये सेक्शन 61 में नहीं था, तो जब आप स्क्रूटनी वाला सेक्शन पढ़ेंगे तो वहां देखेंगे वहां पे लिखा हुआ था इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल. मतलब पहली बार जब नोटिस इशू हो रहा था वहां पे तो इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल के बेसिस पे था, पर यहां पर जो बेसिकली ऑर्डर पास हो रहा है यहां पर ही कैन हैव इंफॉर्मेशन सम अवेलेबल विद हिम. इफ इन केस नॉट अवेलेबल देन ही कैन स्टिल गैदर द इंफॉर्मेशन. वहां पर गैदरिंग फर्स्ट इंस्टेंस पे नहीं हो सकती, वहां गैदरिंग सेकेंड इंस्टेंस पे हो सकती है रिप्लाई आने के बाद में, पर यहां पर सिर्फ गैदरिंग नहीं हो सकती, यहाँ पे यहां पर गैदरिंग भी हो सकती है अगर इंफॉर्मेशन इज नॉट अवेलेबल. So he would gather from where. So let's say he wants to do the assessment by saying, you return to file कर नहीं रहे, so I want to pass an order against him that is required to pay tax. कैसे? So मेरे पास पिछले 3 महीने का GST रिटर्न अवेलेबल है, उसके ऊपर I would apply industry specific GP rate. Let's say I would apply a GP rate of 10%, तो मैं उनके टर्नओवर में 10% का growth I will identify, and on the basis of it I am saying that is required to pay this much amount of tax. Now it will be 10%, 20%, 15%. The basis that would depend on the officer, which can be challenged at a later point of time. But it becomes a basis on the basis of which they can pass a best judgment assessment order under section 62. Once they pass this order, then उसके बाद further proceeding है इसके अंदर. तो order हो गया, तो order तो एक बार finalize हो गया. Now what this section says, ये section कहता है it is notwithstanding section 73-74. What does this mean? इसका मतलब क्या है? 73-74 का प्रोविजन क्या है? 73-74 का प्रोविजन बेसिकली ये है कि आपको शो कॉज नोटिस इशू करना है फॉर टैक्स शॉर्ट पेड, नॉट पेड, erroneously रिफंडेड, क्रेडिट रॉन्गली अवेल्ड, रॉन्गली टेकन एंड ऑल दोस थिंग्स. नाउ व्हेन इट सेज नॉटविथस्टैंडिंग, इट हैज टू बी रेड इट कोहेसिवली, मतलब दोनों को साथ में पढ़ के क्या नॉटविथस्टैंडिंग अलग करने की जरूरत कर रहे हैं. सो द ओनली वन थिंग व्हिच कुड बेसिकली मीन हियर इज द टाइम लिमिट्स, बिकॉज़ रेस्ट एवरीथिंग एल्स इज more or less the procedure would remain same. So what is the time limit? तो 73-74 में लिखा है कि आप ऑर्डर कब तक पास कर सकते हैं, आपको शो कॉज नोटिस ऑर्डर से कितने समय पहले देने की जरूरत है, ऑल दिस थिंग्स. अब सेक्शन 62 में शो कॉज नोटिस का तो कॉन्सेप्ट है नहीं, बिकॉज बेसिकली जो सेक्शन 46 में 3A इशू होता है दैट बिकम्स अ नोटिस. वंस दैट बिकम्स अ नोटिस, उसके बाद तो सीधा ऑर्डर पास करने की जरूरत है ऑफिसर को. एंड हेंस टुमारो असेसी मे नॉट स्टैंड अप एंड से कि सर आपने तो मुझे शोकॉज ही नहीं दिया बेस्ट जजमेंट करने से पहले, इसीलिए आपकी प्रोसीडिंग गलत है, बिकॉज आपने 73-74 में जो लिखा है वो फॉलो नहीं कर रखा. सो नाउ 62 सेज दैट ओके वी आर नॉट रिक्वायर्ड टू फॉलो दैट 6 months and 3 months पीरियड शोकॉज और ऑर्डर के बीच का. तो आपको 46 में नोटिस दिया था, यू डिड नॉट रिप्लाई. नाउ ऑन द बेस ऑफ द इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल आई एम गोइंग फॉरवर्ड एंड डूइंग माय बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट इन दिस रिगार्ड. नो डाउट यहाँ पे असेसमेंट कंप्लीट करने का टाइम लिमिट वही है जो 73-74 में, दैट इज 5 years फ्रॉम द ड्यू डेट ऑफ फाइलिंग ऑफ एनुअल रिटर्न ऑफ द फाइनेंशियल ईयर, जिसके रिस्पेक्ट में टैक्स पे नहीं हो रखा है. ओके, नाउ अभी ये हो गया तो क्या कर सकते हैं? वंस द बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट हैज हैपेंड, तो व्हाट कैन बी डन? नाउ प्रैक्टिकली व्हाट हैपेंस इन मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द केसेस टुडे इज, जो मेरा पहला स्लाइड था जब मैंने कहा जीएसटी इज लोडिंग, सो वो जीएसटी लोडिंग के कारण बहुत सारे बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट हो रहे हैं. वो इसलिए तो असेसी ने अपना GSTR 3B फाइल नहीं करा, उसको बेस्ट जजमेंट का, इसको सेक्शन 46 का नॉन फाइलर का नोटिस आया। वो नोटिस आया उसके पोर्टल के ऊपर, नोटिस एक तो है जीएसटी लॉगिन के ऊपर और एक उसका रजिस्टर्ड ईमेल आईडी के ऊपर है। असेसी का रजिस्टर्ड ईमेल आईडी उसने चेक किया नहीं, because 15 days have elapsed, then officer has went further and he has passed a best judgment order. अब बेस्ट जजमेंट ऑर्डर पास कर दिया उन्होंने, उसके बाद अगर उसका भी इंफॉर्मेशन असेसी 30 डेज में नहीं गैदर कर पाता, then it becomes very difficult and we'll discuss that in the next slide. But if assessee is vigilant enough, उसको पता है कि उसका बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट हो गया है, इन दैट केस जैसे उसको वो ऑर्डर सर्व होता है कि आपके बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट के हिसाब से दिस इज द अमाउंट ऑफ टैक्स लायबिलिटी व्हिच यू हैव टू पे, which is based on estimation, which is based on some data, which may be correct, which may be incorrect, but because it is best judgment, it will have some amount of estimation. अगर असेसी को उसके बाहर आना है, what he has to really do is he has to go forward and file his returns for the period जिसका best judgment assessment हुआ है, and he can find a valid return. What is valid return? जो सेक्शन 2 117 के अंदर लिखा हुआ है, जो हमने पहले देखा था, जहां पे वो ये नहीं कहता कि आपको अपनी बेस्ट जजमेंट टैक्स लायबिलिटी पे करनी है, जहां पे वो कहता है आपको अपनी सेल्फ असेस टैक्स लायबिलिटी पे करनी है। तो मान लीजिए बेस्ट जजमेंट असेसमेंट में मेरे ऊपर टैक्स लायबिलिटी निकाली गई 10 लाख रुपए की, मेरे हिसाब से वो पर्टिकुलर टैक्स पीरियड में टैक्स लायबिलिटी शुड बी 2 लाख रुपीज ओनली। What I can do is that within 30 days of the receipt of this order, I can go ahead, file my GSTR 3B with my assessed tax liability of 2 lakh rupees or 1 lakh rupee, whatever is the case. Once I do that, this order under section 62 would stand withdrawn. ये order withdraw हो जाएगा उस केस में, no doubt। बाकी और प्रोसीडिंग कंटिन्यू हो सकती है, बिकॉज ये ऑर्डर जैसे विड्रॉ हुआ, नाउ देन इट कैन बी अगेन अ स्क्रूटनी असेसमेंट। मेरा सेक्शन 61 में स्क्रूटनी असेसमेंट इशू हो सकता है, और अगर ऑफिसर को लगता है कि मेरे पास नेसेसरी एविडेंस है कि मैं सेक्शन 73 या 74 के अंदर शो कॉज नोटिस इशू करना चाहता हूं, ही मे गो अहेड एंड इशू अ शो कॉज नोटिस। देन इन दैट केस क्या वो 73 का होगा, 74 का होगा, एलिगेशन नॉन पेमेंट लग सकता है, नहीं लग सकता है, दीज आर ऑल सेपरेट क्वेश्चंस व्हिच मे बी आंसर्ड एट अ डिफरेंट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम, बट यस एक बार के लिए ये वाली प्रोसीडिंग क्लोज हो सकती है। So that is why it becomes very important for the assessee to not ignore the notices which are issued under section 46 non filing of return के, क्योंकि वो 15 दिन के बाद में एक तरीके से हम कह सकते हैं there is a power which is available with the proper officer to the best of his understanding whether he executes this or not, वो एक अलग बात है। बट अगर वो एग्जीक्यूट कर देते तो फिर एक सेकेंड अपॉर्चुनिटी मिलती है, ऑर्डर आने के 30 दिन के अंदर द असेसी हैज टू कंपल्सरी फाइल हिज रिटर्न एंड ही हैज टू कंप्लाई विद द पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स। नाउ कैन सेल्फ असेस्ड लायबिलिटी बी जीरो? The answer is yes, it can be zero also. I can say for this period my self assessment liability should have been zero, but obviously he should be able to substantiate it, because अगर वो substantiate नहीं कर पाता कि उन्होंने अपना nil का GSTR 3B क्यों भरा है, then no doubt the assessee is basically attracting the officer to issue a notice under 74, जहां पर penal provision is a little harsh and it unnecessarily creates a challenge for the assessee. So that's the procedure which I have been talking about. What happens in this? Notice in the 46, when the return is not filed, best judgment assessment order, then there is a summary order which is uploaded in DRC 07. उसके 30 दिन के अंदर अगर valid return file हो जाता है, order stands withdrawn, और वो जो withdrawal होता है वो DRC 08 के through withdrawal होता है. Now there are two judgments in this regard and they're very useful judgments. And again, both these judgments are not in favoring the assessee. In fact, ये department के favoring judgment है, but we should be aware about this to know कि यहाँ पे जो time limits है वो कितनी important है और हम क्यों उनको breach नहीं कर सकते. So there is this case of Bridge Hygiene Services Private Limited. इनका best judgment assessment हो गया था and they paid necessary tax and everything. The only error which they did is कि उन्होंने जो अपना GSTR 3B फाइल करा वो 30 दिन के बाद फाइल करा, and I think in this case the return was filed maybe on the 32nd or 35th day if I am not wrong. Now in this case they और तो जैसे उन्होंने ये करा, they requested the officer to say now you please withdraw the best judgment assessment order, क्योंकि हमने टैक्स पे कर दिया, हमने सब कुछ कर दिया, but आपके best judgment assessment order में there is a penalty and everything which you have asked for, because we have filed returns and everything, please withdraw that order. The officer said I am bound by the time limits which are given in the section. तो वहां पर तो लिखा है 30 दिन में आपको फाइल करना था, because you have not filed it I cannot withdraw it. The assessee went to the high court. They requested the high court to basically condone that delay which they have done in filing the return. The high court said we cannot basically rewrite the law. by saying that अगर कोई time limit provision में लिखा हुआ है, then you are duty bound to adhere the time limit, and we cannot basically read it liberally by saying कि ठीक है इसको 30 की जगह 33 पढ़ लो या 34 पढ़ लो या 32 दिन में कर लो. If you are required to do something in 30 days, you have to do it in 30 days. So that becomes very important, that if in case anything of this sort is happening, assessee should be very clear. And why am I bringing this here is this judgment, in fact, which I read today morning only. That is this PB Enterprises. It's a Kerala High Court judgment. It's a recent judgment. So in this case, what had happened? Best judgment assessment हो गया. Assessment order था 20 अगस्त 2019 का. असेसिंग प्रॉपर ऑफिसर ने क्या किया, उसको जीएसटी पोर्टल पे अपलोड कर दिया और एसएससी की ईमेल पर भेज दिया. एसएससी ने कहा मुझे ईमेल पर कभी रिसीव नहीं हुआ और उन्होंने जीएसटी पोर्टल पे चेक किया नहीं उसको. एंड बेसिकली नोबडी हैज दिस हैबिट ऑफ एक्चुअली चेकिंग द नोटिसेस एंड द ऑर्डर्स कॉलम रेगुलरली, सो दे नेवर चेक्ड इट, दे वर नॉट अवेयर ऑफ दिस. उनको रजिस्टर्ड कोर्ट से ये ऑर्डर मिला कुछ मे बी आफ्टर 35-40 डेज, और जैसे ही उनको ये ऑर्डर मिला उसके 30 दिन के अंदर उन्होंने अपना जीएसटीआर 3B फाइल कर दिया. And then they requested कि now within the receipt of 30 days of order we have filed our GSTR 3B, तो please आप अपना बेस्ट जजमेंट ऑर्डर को विड्रॉ कर लीजिए. The officer said कि आपने जो रिटर्न फाइल किया है वो रजिस्टर्ड कोर्ट से जो आपको 30 दिन में मिला उसके 30 दिन में कराया, जबकि आपको डिलीवरी तो हमने पहले ही कर दी थी, क्योंकि जो ऑर्डर की डेट है उसी दिन आपके जीएसटी पोर्टल पे we had put in. And as per section 169, service on the GST portal is a valid service. तो आपको जो ऑर्डर है वो ऑर्डर तो आपको 20/8/2019 को मिल गया था और उसके 30 दिन के अंदर यू आर रिक्वायर्ड टू डू दैट. The High Court, when the matter went to the High Court said yes, it is correct. The service was proper when it was basically served on the GST portal. और उसके 30 दिन के अंदर because they have not filed the return, hence the benefit cannot be extended. So with these two judgments, I think we get a very good clarity. That is to say कि पहले तो 30 दिन का time limit जो है it is a mandatory time limit. And second, service now in majority of the cases would happen through email. It would happen on GST portal, and that is why we should always have a dedicated person who's checking after the GST portal, and we should always have a person who ensures that whenever he receives any email, that email is being forwarded to the concerned person. Otherwise, it may land up us to trouble. We may go to High Court also, but High Court may not be able to help us. Now, we come to section 63. And this section is for assessment of unregistered person. तो अगर आप देखेंगे तो धीरे धीरे sections they are basically getting diluted. पहले registered person जो return file कर रहे थे उनके लिए था, उसके बाद वो registered person जो return नहीं file कर रहे थे उनके लिए था. अब 63 उन लोगों के लिए है who are basically unregistered person, and they are unregistered for two reasons. One is they were liable to pay tax but they did not take registration, और second वो लोग जो रजिस्टर्ड थे बट उनका रजिस्ट्रेशन प्रॉपर ऑफिसर ने सुयो मोटो कैंसिल कर दिया. And that suo motu cancellation has happened because they did not respond or they were not filing their returns or the reasons which are given under section 29 subsection 2. तो ये दो केसेस में वो लोग जहां पर the department or the enforcing agency is very clear to identify those people जो उनके हिसाब से रजिस्टर्ड होके टैक्स पे करने चाहिए थे, पर या तो वो अपनी इच्छा से रजिस्टर्ड नहीं है या फिर डिपार्टमेंट ने उनके रजिस्ट्रेशन को कंपल्सरी कैंसिल किया है बिकॉज वो कंप्लायंस नहीं कर रहे थे, एंड अकॉर्डिंग टू डिपार्टमेंट अंडरस्टैंडिंग दे वर लायबल टू पे टैक्स, देन देयर असेसमेंट कैन आल्सो हैपन ऑन द बेस्ट जजमेंट बेसिस. So just like it was happening under section 62, maybe for different set of assessees, it is also happening on unregistered person who basically do not have a GSTN number. Now you remember friends, there was no requirement to issue a show cause notice because वहां पर जो notice 46 में non filing का issue हो रहा था, technically that was treated as a show cause notice. In this case there is a requirement to issue a show cause notice in ASMT 14. So whenever on an unregistered person there would be any best judgment assessment, the notice will be issued under ASMT 10 as to why they would be asked कि क्यों आपसे इतना tax, interest और penalty ना वसूली जाए on the best judgment basis. 15 दिन का समय दिया जाता है इसके अंदर, जहां on 15 days the assessee is required to reply, and again this 15 days it is not basically actually equivalent to what is the time limit which is given under 73-74, क्योंकि 73-74 में वहां पर reasonable opportunity की बात है, वहां पे adjournments की बात है. यहाँ पर this section doesn't talk about all these things. It says because principle of natural justice has to be followed, and on that basis we are giving this time limit of 15 days to the assessee after ASMT 14. Now again if you draw a parallel from 61-62 to 61 में लिखा था आप information gathering के basis पे आ सकते हैं, 62 में लिखा था इंफॉर्मेशन 61 में लिखा था इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल के बेसिस पे आ सकते हैं, 62 में लिखा था इंफॉर्मेशन अवेलेबल इंफॉर्मेशन गैदर्ड के बेसिस पे आ सकते हैं, 63 is silent. 63 doesn't talk about anything. 63 doesn't says it is आप यहाँ पर जो असेसिंग ऑफिसर इंफॉर्मेशन गैदर करेगा या लेगा उनके पास होनी चाहिए, वो कहीं और से लेंगे. So because it is silent, they can according to their understanding on the basis however they want to take the information, they would be able to find the information in this case, and then they will pass the order identifying that on the best judgment basis this is the tax amount that the person is required to pay. Again, there is a time limit for passing the order. That time limit is pervasive. That's same throughout in all the provisions. That is within 5 years from the due date of filing of annual return for that particular year, जिसके लिए best judgment assessment हो रहा है. तो अगर हम 17-18 की बात करें तो because due date was 31st of January 2020, so technically all these assessment under 63, 62, 61, not 61 but 62, 63, it can happen up till 30th of January 2025. So बड़ा लंबा समय है जो डिपार्टमेंट के पास में अवेलेबल है. And then they are not required to follow the procedure of 73, that 73, 74, that is time limits and other things which are given in that particular section. So this was regarding 63. Now we come to 64. Up 64 is a section which can be again used by the department, but if it is used, it is very dangerous. But again, it cannot be used without having proper authority. So what is this 64 saying? So 64 is saying कि जहां पर proper officer के पास में ऐसा evidence available है कि tax liability कोई है, जो एक a person who is required to pay tax, he has not paid it, and he believes कि अगर उन्होंने assessment तुरंत पास नहीं किया तो in the interest of the revenue ऐसा हो सकता है that they might lose out the opportunity to take that tax which otherwise they are legitimately should have been paid to the government. Then they would seek permission from the additional commissioner and joint commissioner, और वो permission इस चीज की लेंगे कि वो they want to go ahead and assess the tax liability on a person. तो यहाँ पर once they have the necessary evidence, तो 2A check है. पहला उनके पास में evidence होना चाहिए, वो evidence के बेस पे they have to go to their senior officer has to give cognizance to that. देने के बाद they have to give the necessary permission, and once they give a permission on this understanding कि अगर ये चीज नहीं करी गई, मतलब assessment order पास करने का जो टाइम लिमिट की बात है, अगर हमने डिले करा असेसमेंट को तो हो सकता है कि हम वो टैक्स कभी रिकवर नहीं कर पाए फॉर वॉट एवर रीजन, कि वो हो सकता है जिन गुड्स के रिस्पेक्ट में टैक्स है वो गुड्स का किसी इस तरीके से छुपा दिया जाए दैट नोबडी इज एबल टू फाइंड दैट आउट, और द पर्सन जिससे टैक्स रिकवर करना है देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी, देयर इज अ सर्कमस्टेंशियल एविडेंस दैट पर्सन इज ट्राइंग टू flee away, or that person is trying to basically abscond or run away, then in that cases they would take the necessary permission, and in the interest of the revenue they would go ahead and pass a necessary assessment order. Now इस केस में there is a proviso, and proviso ये कहता है इसी सेक्शन के तहत अगर मान लीजिए कोई टैक्स लाइबिलिटी किन्हीं गुड्स के रिस्पेक्ट में है, और वो गुड्स के रिस्पेक्ट में जो टैक्स लाइबिलिटी है और वो गुड्स मान लीजिए किसी एक्स आदमी के पास में है, और ये नहीं पता कि ये गुड्स के ऊपर टैक्स पे एक्स को करना था या वाई को करना था या जेड को करना था, then in that case section 61(1) proviso 64(1) proviso says, then in that case the person who is in charge of those goods, be it a warehouse keeper, be it anybody else who has the possession of those goods, उसको taxable person मान लिया जाएगा और उसके ऊपर टैक्स लाइबिलिटी को आइडेंटिफाई कर दिया जाएगा. So basically then what that taxable person would do, he would give away those goods to he would either sell those goods in the market or give to the concerned officer, and on the basis of that they would recover the tax or anything of that sort. So before we go to 64 subsection 2 is 64(1) or proviso, इससे what basically comes out is that officer has necessary evidences available with him, then he can proceed accordingly. We unfortunately had a bad experience with this section, where in one of the cases what had happened is that one of our client has actually opened a warehouse in the same state, and it was in a different city. So that opened a big warehouse there and the goods were lying there. Now technically what happens is that whenever you have an additional place of business, you are required to intimate that and you are required to update that in your GST registration certificate, और उसके लिए 15 दिन का समय है जो registration के provisions में दिया गया है. The assessee, the time limit of 15 days has not passed, but the registration was also not uploaded, updated on GST portal. Somehow, the one of the teams of the revenue departments, they were able to know that this warehouse is there, and these goods are basically lying in somebody in this premises, and that is not added in the GST registration certificate. So they reached those premises, they sealed those premises, and they did assessment under 64 subsection 1 proviso by saying कि ये माल तो ऐसा है जिसका we are not able to identify any person, and hence that is why we would treat the warehouse owner है जो वहां पर था, he is in charge, and on the basis of it we are doing assessment on that person, and then accordingly they wanted to recover the tax liability. Now this is actually abuse of power for a very simple reason to say, क्योंकि 15 दिन का टाइम लिमिट जब कानून में दिया गया है, so that time limit has to be honored, otherwise that time limit has no sense. And once that has to be honored, so then if in case other circumstantial evidence are there, somebody is saying that these are my goods, I have transferred them from my one premises to another, I will add that in my warehouse registration, then it is not be a foot case of 64(1). So against all these in such circumstances there is a 64 subsection 2. ये क्या बोलता है कि अगर इस ऑर्डर के पास होने के 30 दिन के अंदर या तो प्रॉपर ऑफिसर खुद या फिर एडिशनल कमिश्नर या जॉइंट कमिश्नर जिन्होंने परमिशन दी थी वो, या फिर जिसके अगेंस्ट में ऑर्डर पास हुआ है, अगर वो रिटर्न में एप्लीकेशन देते हैं और तीनों में से किसी को भी लगता है कि ऑर्डर वाज एरनियस, ऑर्डर के अंदर कुछ गलती थी, देन दिस ऑर्डर मे बी विड्रॉन एंड देन नेसेसरी प्रोसीडिंग 73-74 की शुरू हो सकती है. तो ऐसा नहीं है मैटर क्लोज हो जाएगा. मैटर फॉर द टाइम बिंग जो डिमांड कंफर्म हुई है, वो जो कंफर्म डिमांड है दैट वुड बेसिकली बी विड्रॉन, और फर्दर प्रोसीडिंग्स फॉर इशुएंस ऑफ शो कॉज नोटिस एंड आस्किंग फॉर इंफॉर्मेशन एंड देन गोइंग टू एडजुडिकेशन प्रोसीजर, वो सब चीजें हैं जो फॉलो हो सकती हैं, एंड देन फाइनली डिसीजन वुड बी टेकन. So 64(1) basically it looks like that it has used hemisphere to cover, but 64(2) kind of basically curbs that power, subject to तीनों में से कोई एक है who are vigilant enough and who are able to bring this on record that the order which was passed, it was an erroneous order. So that's what 64(2) clearly brings out. So I think that's the repetition of whatever I have said. So I would not go on to this slide. I think we have covered from 59 to 64. I would still like to cover some part of 73-74 here because they are relevant here. क्योंकि अभी तक मैंने जितनी बात करी उसमें मैंने कई बार सेक्शन 73 और सेक्शन 74 का रेफरेंस दिया. So I don't think we'll be able to justify if in case we don't conclude on 73-74. So maybe on for 5-7 minutes I would like to touch upon in brief what is 73-74 saying. But by and large, if you realize that from 59 till 64 there is a journey. And officer basically whenever he has to issue a notice to conduct an assessment, so first of all ऐसा नहीं है कि हर assessee का assessment होगा, so that we have to take it out from our mind कि GST में हर assessee का assessment होना है. Second, यहाँ का जो assessment है वो assessment वैसा detailed assessment नहीं है that they are asking for information, we are giving information and then order is being passed. All these assessment they are basically getting triggered due to some reason or the other. या तो रिटर्न के अंदर कोई डिस्क्रिपेंसी है, या रिटर्न नहीं फाइल हुआ है, या रजिस्टर्ड होना चाहिए और एसएससी रजिस्टर्ड नहीं है, या फिर जो ऐसा एविडेंस अवेलेबल है दैट एसएससी माइट रन अवे. ये 4 इंस्टेंसेस है जहां पर डिपार्टमेंट की तरफ से कोई एक्शन इनिशिएट हो सकता है, और 59-60 दो इंस्टेंसेस ऐसे हैं जहां पर 59 इज कंप्लीट रिलायंस ऑन द एसएससी, एसएससी ने क्या किया है गिविंग थ्रस्ट टू दैट, दैट्स 59. और 60 में जहां पर assessee is requesting to the officer by saying please do my provisional assessment first, let me continue my business and then give me a final assessment order. Okay, against all these orders, all the orders which are passed under this section from 60 to 64, they are appealable orders. Against that appeal lies to the first appellate authority. ऑर्डर रिसीव होने के 3 महीने के अंदर अपील फाइल हो सकती है, subject to there is a pre-deposit which is 10% of the disputed amount which needs to be paid. Let's say that in some cases the proceedings have not concluded here or they were concluded पर उनको withdraw कर लिया गया या आगे के लिए रेफर कर दिया गया, so then there is a 73-74. What is 73-74 saying is that same proper officer now if in case अब हम assessment से आ गए adjudication के ऊपर, तो 73-74 का जो सफर है वो सिर्फ 59 से 64 से नहीं होता है, वो डायरेक्ट 73-74 भी हो सकता है, या फिर 65 की जो ऑडिट है डिपार्टमेंटल ऑडिट के बाद भी हो सकता है, 66 की स्पेशल ऑडिट के बाद भी हो सकता है, 67 की सर्च प्रोसीडिंग्स के बाद भी हो सकता है और 70 की समन प्रोसीडिंग्स के बाद भी हो सकता है। तो 73 74 में आने के बहुत सारे रास्ते हैं, हमने उनमें से कुछ रास्तों पे चर्चा करी है और अब हम डायरेक्ट 73 74 की बात कर रहे हैं, तो बाकी रास्तों पे आज हम बात नहीं कर रहे हैं। So what is this 73 74 saying? It says that whenever you have not paid tax, short paid tax, tax erroneously refunded, input tax credit wrongly availed या input tax credit wrongly utilized, इन पांचों में से या तो ये पांचों चीजें या पांचों में से कुछ चीजें या पांचों में से एक चीज, अगर ऐसा कुछ भी हो रहा है, then in that case officer can go forward, issue a notice to you and ask why it should not be recovered from you along with interest and other dues whatever are applicable under this in this act. बट इसके लिए भी अगेन दो रास्ते हैं, कब 73 लगेगा कब 74 लगेगा, उसके पीछे के लिए देयर हैज टू बी स्पेसिफिक रीजन एंड आई थिंक ऑल ऑफ अस शुड बी वेरी मच क्लियर ऑन देम एंड ऑल ऑफ अस शुड बी very much clear that how do we have to reply to this. That is 73 would be only applicable जब पांचों वाली जो पांच चीजें लिख रखी हैं, इन पांचों में से कोई एक चीज का एलिगेशन है, तो एलिगेशन होगा कि आपने इन पांचों में से कोई एक चीज करी है, और ये एलिगेशन अगर है बट इस एलिगेशन के पीछे जो इंटेंशन था एसएससी का, वो इंटेंशन फ्रॉड करने का नहीं था, मिसस्टेटमेंट का नहीं था और सप्रेशन का नहीं था, या इंटेंशन टू इवेड पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स का नहीं था, पर फिर भी टैक्स कम जमा हुआ है, तो नोटिस सेक्शन 73 में इशू होगा। पर अगर इंटेंशन टैक्स चोरी का था और ये एलिगेशन इस एलिगेशन के साथ में जुड़ा हुआ है, उसके पीछे का नेसेसरी एलिगेशन का रीजनिंग के साथ है, तो नोटिस सेक्शन 74 में इशू होगा। तो जहां 73 में नोटिस इशू हुआ है, वहां पर हमें यह बताना है कि क्यों वो जो कह रहे हैं कि टैक्स लगना चाहिए या हमने कम जमा कराया, रिफंड गलत है, हमें सिर्फ उसका जवाब देना है। जहां 74 में नोटिस इशू हुआ है, हमें इसका तो जवाब देना है कि हमें टैक्स नहीं चुकाना है इफ इन केस इट इज नॉट रिक्वायर्ड टू बी पेड, plus why it is not a fit case to be issued under 73 but it should have been issued why it is not a fit case to issue under 74 but it should have been issued under 73. And why am I saying all this? Because 74 में पेनल्टी प्रोविजंस अलग है, 73 में पेनल्टी प्रोविजंस अलग है, 74 में टाइम लिमिट्स अलग है, 73 में टाइम लिमिट्स अलग है। 74 में एंटर करने के बाद अगर आप बेनिफिट लेना चाहते हैं तो बेनिफिट की कॉस्ट ज्यादा है जो आपको पे करनी है। 73 में एंटर करने के बाद अगर आप बेनिफिट लेके यू वांट टू कम आउट ऑफ, देन वहां पे कॉस्ट कम है। And that is why it becomes important that we understand what is fraud, what is willful misstatement, and what is suppression of facts. So when you go to definition of fraud, so definition of fraud is not there in the GST law. But when you try to find out the meaning which is coming from the old Supreme Court judgments, so there is this judgment of Cosmic Dye Chemical. It's an old Supreme Court judgment of 1995. They say जहां पर fraud का allegation है, वहां पर ये चीज ऑफिसर को बताने की जरूरत नहीं है कि इंटेंशन टू इवेड पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स है या नहीं, क्योंकि फ्रॉड के अंदर इंटेंशन चोरी करने का इनबिल्ट होता है। बट देयर इज अ केस ऑफ फ्रॉड और नॉट, वो कैसे पता चलेगा? जब ये चीज हम स्टैब्लिश कर सकते हैं कि किसी ने जानबूझ के जो सत्य है वो सत्य नहीं बोला और सत्य जानने के बावजूद दे हैव गिवन अ रॉन्ग स्टेटमेंट और दे हैव बेसिकली मिसरिप्रेजेंटेड द ट्रूथ, या फिर जो मटेरियल फैक्ट्स थे उनके साथ में उन्होंने ऑल्ट्रेशन किया है, उनको फैब्रिकेट किया है, देन इट इज अ केस ऑफ फ्रॉड। एंड वंस इट इज अ केस ऑफ फ्रॉड, देन वी डिड नॉट से बेसिकली कि वहां पे इंटेंशन टू इवेड पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स था या नहीं था। So that's the case of fraud. You would find these cases of fake invoicing and all those things. These are cases of fraud. These are pure fraud cases which are being covered. जहां पर डिपार्टमेंट को ये नहीं आइडेंटिफाई कराने की जरूरत है अपने नोटिस में कि वहां पर एसएससी का इंटेंशन टैक्स चोरी का था या नहीं था, बिकॉज वो इनबिल्ट है उसके अंदर, टैक्स चोरी का इंटेंशन था तभी फ्रॉड किया गया था। vis-a-vis when you come to misstatement and suppression, वहां पर दो चीजें हैं जो बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है। एक है विलफुल होना चाहिए वो, और साथ में वहां पर देयर हैज टू बी इंटेंशन टू इवेड पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स। तो अगर कोई चीज सप्रेस करी गई है, मतलब कोई चीज बतानी चाहिए थी मैंने नहीं बताई, और मिस स्टेटमेंट का मतलब मुझे कोई चीज इस तरीके से बतानी थी पर मैंने गलत तरीके से बताई है, देन इन दैट केस पहले तो ये दोनों चीजें जानबूझकर करी हुई होनी चाहिए, मतलब मैंने जानबूझकर छुपाया या मैंने जानबूझकर गलत तरीके से बताया, और सेकंड ये जानबूझकर करने के बाद इन दोनों के लिए जो इंटेंशन था वो टैक्स इवेजन का इंटेंशन होना चाहिए। वंस इट इज देयर, देन इट becomes a fit case for section 74, and you would find lot of the show cause notices which are being issued, they would be issued on misstatement or suppression with an intention to evade payment of tax. For example, मेरे को GSTR 3B में रिटर्न दिखाना, फिगर दिखाना था, X column में मैंने दिखाया दिया Y column में, so it becomes a misstatement and they would say it is a clear case of section 74. वहां पर it is our responsibility to explain to the officer, just because मैंने गलत कॉलम में दिखाया, वहां पर intention to evade payment of tax नहीं निकल के आता. Second, it is not willful because it is an error in punching. And that's why you cannot issue a notice under 74. You have to compulsorily issue a notice under 73 in this regard. Or suppression is a very interesting story, because suppression की definition है इस कानून में. क्या definition है? It says suppression shall mean non-declaration of facts or information which a taxable person is required to declare in the return, statement, report, or any other document furnished under this act or rules made thereunder, or failure to furnish any information on being asked for in writing by proper officer. मतलब ये डेफिनेशन इतनी एग्जॉस्टिव, वो कहते हैं कि कोई चीज आपको बतानी थी, आपने नहीं बताई, चाहे रिटर्न में नहीं बताई, जवाब में नहीं बताई, किसी और रिपोर्ट में नहीं बताई, इट बिकम्स सप्रेशन. नाउ आई जस्ट गिव वन एग्जांपल एंड देन आई वुड क्लोज एज टू व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से. यू टेक दिस एग्जांपल. तो वो जितने भी एसएससी जिनका टर्नओवर 2 करोड़ रुपए से नीचे का है, उन सबको गवर्नमेंट ने रिलैक्सेशन दे रखा है, दैट यू इफ यू डोंट वांट टू फाइल योर जीएसटी ऑन 9, then you don't file it, it shall be assumed that that return has been filed on the GST portal on the due date. Okay, so let's say मेरा टर्नओवर 2 करोड़ से नीचे का है, मैं मेरा जीएसटी 9 फाइल नहीं करता हूं, एंड आई आल्सो डील इन म्यूचुअल फंड्स. नाउ म्यूचुअल फंड्स आर सिक्योरिटीज जिसके ऊपर जीएसटी नहीं लगता है, बिकॉज दे आर नीदर गुड्स नॉट सर्विसेज. बट म्यूचुअल फंड्स, बिकॉज दे आर सिक्योरिटीज, सेक्शन 17 में फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ कैलकुलेशन ऑफ एग्जेम्प्टेड सप्लाईज फॉर आईटीसी रिवर्सल, दे आर बीइंग कंसिडर्ड. तो अब मान लीजिए मैंने मेरा जीएसटी 9 फाइल नहीं करा, किसी कारणवश मेरे को सेक्शन 61 में स्क्रूटनी का नोटिस आया है. स्क्रूटनी के नोटिस के दौरान व्हेन आई हैव गिवन द इंफॉर्मेशन, दिस इज बीइंग नोटिस्ड दैट आई हैव नॉट पेड टैक्स, आई हैव नॉट रिवर्स्ड माय इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट under this section 17(2) because I had this exempted supplies of selling of mutual fund, जहां पे 1% value of the sale value is treated as an exempted value. Now what can be the allegation? Allegation can be, आपको GSTR 9 के अंदर एक हमने जगह दे रखी है exempted, nil rated, non GST, no supply की, वहां पर आपने 1% of the sale value of mutual fund को नहीं दिखाया. That means you have suppressed it. Because you have suppressed it, it has not come to the notice. Because it did not come to the notice, and during the scrutiny of return it was noticed, hence we make it a fit case of 74. और अब हम जो आपसे आईटीसी रिवर्सल करा रहे हैं वो 74 में कराते हैं, जहां पे आपसे टैक्स मांगते हैं, ब्याज मांगते हैं और 100% पेनल्टी मांगते हैं. Now in this case it becomes the responsibility of the person who is filing the return and जिसको ये notice मिला है, that he explains that I did not show it in my GSTR 3 or GSTR 9 because I opted this relaxation. It was bona fide. Second, when I did not show it because I was of this understanding that I am not required to do it when I am not required to file my return. And third, it did not have a substantial impact. अब ये फैक्ट्स ऑफ द केस पर डिपेंड करेगा कि आपने सेल्फ असेसमेंट के जो प्रोविजंस हैं उनको फॉलो किया या नहीं किया, आपको डिस्क्लोजर करना चाहिए था, नहीं करना चाहिए था, आपने सर्कमस्टेंशियल एविडेंस और क्या दिखाए इस केस के अंदर, एंड बिकॉज दिस रिलैक्सेशन इज देयर वुड यू बी एबल टू एक्चुअली गेट आउट ऑफ दिस. बट वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट सप्रेशन के साथ वो विलफुल होना जरूरी है और इंटेंशन टू इवेट पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स होना जरूरी है, तभी वो 74 में जाके फॉल करता है. So I think with this we can close the discussion which we had on assessments and a little bit of it on 73, 74 as to how they are being initiated. I would again like to thank all of you for a patient hearing. In case there are any other questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you so much.
There are a couple of questions. Would you like me to read them, or you can just see them at the bottom of the screen also?
I'll just see, madam. You may read them because I cannot see anything in the screen as of now.
So Abhinav Gupta has a query that we've done audit of 17-18 and had many mistakes in 3B and GST 1. There's also mismatch with the financial statement. How would the assessment be done in this case?
Okay, so one is that you should have, there is no assessment as such as I was explaining. अब या तो आपको ऑडिट का नोटिस आएगा सेक्शन 65 में, तब you would explain it, or you might get a notice for scrutiny of return under section 61. The best way to do it is कि you should have rectified all this in GSTR 9. अगर आपने rectify कर दिया है, then there is no problem. If you have not been even able to rectify, still you have a possibility to ensure that department tomorrow does not tells you कि आपने जानबूझ के नहीं दिखाया. Just write a letter to the department. और उनको बता दीजिए कि ये चीजें हैं, I wanted to rectify because I cannot do it because time limit has expired, but my intention was never to basically suppress it, so I am giving it for your record. And keep a copy of that letter with you in your file. हो सकता है डिपार्टमेंटल ऑफिसर वो लेटर ना ले, just send it to a registered post. That will solve your purpose.
Right. So the next query is by Shailendra, that can a penalty be imposed when date of filing return was extended by more than a month?
No. So once your due date has been extended for filing of return, it automatically extends your due date for payment of tax, and in that case, there would not be any penalty.
Right. So Abhinav is a query that whether under section 62, opportunity of filing return will be provided by the AO.
Yeah, so opportunity is already given. First, within 15 days from issuance of 3A, once you the order is passed against you, तो 30 दिन के अंदर आप खुद return file कर सकते हैं. Automatically that order gets withdrawn.
Right. So Rohit has a query that they received a notice from GST, DGGI regarding non-payment of service tax. So whether such notice for non-payment of service tax is valid now?
It's a good query. It goes back to section 174 repeal and saving कि क्या आप पुराने कानून में रिपील एंड सेविंग्स का जो सेक्शन है हमारे CGST एक्ट में वो सर्विस टैक्स को सेव करता है या नहीं करता है. बिकॉज एक्चुअली 173 में सर्विस टैक्स के आगे इट हैज बीन रिटन दैट इट इज omitted, and by omission there is a judgment of Raila Corporation Supreme Court which says that omission means as if it never existed. So can we relook it from that respect? It's a matter which will go into High Court. If you want to take a little aggressive stand, the better it is you go directly to the High Court and challenge the notice. If in case you don't want to go to High Court, then unfortunately you have to deal it on merits.
Right. Abhinav Gupta has another query. Survey of income tax, suppression of sales and purchase in year 1920 from June 19 to Jan 20. Now in 3B of March 20, all suppressed shown in line as declared in the ITR. What would be the implications under GST?
No thing. So once you have declared it and GST officers have not, anybody has not issued a notice to you, you have done a voluntary compliance under section 59. Yes, you would be required to pay interest in this case, but apart from that, there cannot be any levy of penalty in this regard.
Right, sir. So Vivek has a query that the tax audit 1718, there are lesser purchases as compared to the purchases under 2A. GST audit is pending. How can we do the working?
So, sir, GST or 2A matching in 1718, it was not mandatory. There is no provision in the law which said that whatever credit you are taking under section 16, it should have matched with 2A. In fact, this matching has come from 36(4) only, rule 36(4) from October 2019. So one way of looking at it is कि अगर आपने section 16 subsection 2 की चारों conditions को आपके हिसाब से satisfy कर रखा है, then there is no problem, even if that credit is not coming in 2A, subject to that you have made payment of tax to the supplier, okay, and maybe you can take a return declaration from him by saying that you have discharged the necessary tax, but still you want to take my view would be that you still take the credit and contest the matter.
Right. This rounds up the queries that we had for today. Vivek sir, would you like to say something?
Yeah, really nice. And we are even getting many requests for another webinar. Many members are saying very nice deliberation. Please organize other webinar with the same speaker. So my request to Neha, please take the date from ESD so that we can organize another webinar also. Really wonderful. And many requests for your PPTs also. If you can share, then we will upload.
Yeah, I think I have not sent my earlier PPT also. I would send both the PPT.
Yes, and my suggestion to all of you, please check into the comment box. We upload the PPT into the comment section. You will get the link there. Yesterday webinar was with Batra ji, और कल ही वो link लगा दिया था. You can download from there, and also please subscribe the CA Sansaar YouTube channel also. Yes, Neha ji. Yes.
We convey a very sincere thanks to Yash ji for coming over and explaining the fine nuances involved in assessment under GST in such depth and detail. And I must appreciate that he's always forthcoming with varied topics beneficial for our members and is always very gracious with all our requests for webinars. So we always look forward to your presence with
My
a
pleasure.
different topic very soon again.
So tomorrow we have another wonderful session. It's the question and answer
My pleasure,
session with
madam.
Dr. Rakesh Gupta ji. So thank you very much, Yash ji, for such a wonderful presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.